All right. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Justin White. We're here with Greg Banish from Calibrated Success. Somebody that before I even got into tuning, I bought his DVD and his book and started that on my journey. So to be able to sit here today is pretty awesome. He's gonna kind of discuss a couple things. We'll go over a couple topics, a little bit on your history, and then just kind of the way OE calibrators and aftermarket calibrators think, since you are both.
Sometimes.
And see how we can jive and where we agree, disagree, and if he makes me look stupid, that's okay.
We're gonna fight to
that.
that.
I'm here for it. Yeah.
It's the last man standing, right?
Not physically. I'm tired.
Oh, all right, sorry.
All right. So just to start off, just kind of touch on why you even got into the path that you got into. What pushed you into that? Was it just like a burning desire to want to always wonder, or did you just always wonder from a young age?
Well, the math and science thing came to me easy when I was a kid. So you get pushed into the more math and science classes you're good at, the more you get pushed into, and like, well, of course you go to engineering school, right? And I grew up here in the Detroit area. The house I grew up in was literally down the road from the GM Tech Center. To say that you know a few people who work at GM or Ford or Chrysler in this town is an absolute understatement, because it's the Motor City, it's Detroit. So there's a lot of that here. So I went to engineering school, and I want to do automotive engineering. Where's a good automotive engineering school? So I went to GMI, because that was, at the time in the 90s, that was like the automotive engineering school to go to. Okay, cool, I got in. I guess I'm going there. And when I went to engineering school, I wasn't really all that into cars. Like, I had an appreciation for, yes, there's cool cars out there, and some of them are faster. A Lambo, a Porsche, whatever is kind of faster. But I was really kind of more into car stereo as I left high school going into college. But as soon as you get there, your peer group in engineering and automotive engineering is people who are like into cars, right? And there's guys who have been building cars for a decade, right? Since before they could drive. And you start reading some of these magazines, you pick up an issue of Hot Rod, pick up an issue of Muscle Mustangs and Fast Forwards. You're like, oh, hey, if I just do this, this, and this, I can make a Mustang faster than a Porsche. That's pretty cool. Like, how does that work? And at the same time, I'm having those classes that teach exactly how that works. So once you get past calculus and physics, you start getting into thermodynamics. And after you get through thermodynamics, now you qualify to take engine design. And then after engine design, you take another class we call power systems, which is, now we discuss supercharging at the collegiate level. Like, what does it really mean to supercharge an engine? And I'm just eating this stuff up. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. So my senior year in college, I bought a 5-liter Mustang. It's actually the teal car up on the wall over there. Oh, man. So it was 1997, I bought a 93 LX. Like, 5-liter, manual. Like, hell yeah. And when I graduated engineering school, my graduation present myself was an Incon twin turbo kit for the car.
Good present. Good choice.
So yeah, it's like, keep in mind, you got to date it, like late 90s, right? Everyone's doing nitrous or Vortec and the occasional Pro Charger, right? Turbos are not a thing unless you have a Buick. But as an engineering student, I'm like, well, why would you not do that? That uses the energy that's available. You're wasting the energy if you don't use it.
Throw it away. Why not utilize it?
So I'm like, of course I want to do that, and I can make boost sooner. Wouldn't that be great? And I could have different loading in the cylinders, and I start kind of nerding out on it. And I put it all together, and I had a local tuner take the first stab at it, but they kind of took the approach. They had always been doing what they knew, which was put a Vortec on a 5-liter. They were tuning it like it had a centrifugal supercharger.
Yeah, which is definitely.
And we were kind of talking earlier, like some of the things that we did back in the day to make it work versus what the right answer would be if the OEM was doing that. Well, those are two different answers, right? So the make it work for a centrifugal doesn't work the same when you can build a lot of boost early through the mid-range with a turbo system.
Right.
And so it never really ran right. And so through friends and friends of friends, I started linking up, and I made friends with Mike Wesley, and he was the guy who invented the AutoLogic Chipmaster stuff. I'm like, Mike, you gotta get me a copy of your software. Let me buy a copy, get me a license, make me a dealer, whatever. I want to make my car right. I'm tired of waiting for other people. I know what I should try to do to make this thing work better. I just need access. And so finally I got Chipmaster, and that's where I started tuning on my 5 liter. And then there were some other tools out there. In the early days, we had like LT1 Edit for the Camaros, right? And you had tuner cats.
Just dated yourself hardcore.
Oh yeah,
hardcore.
Well, so when Moats had his stuff, right? And so that was
Craig Moats. Yep.
Yeah, and that's what we had, right? So now, and we're kind of talking before. All these software systems would just open up the tables, and there were unlabeled tables other than like the units and the label of the table, right? But it doesn't tell you what it does. So you have to look at a table and say, well, what is this? So there's, you have a base spark table, but then you have these other adders. So there's an IAT spark table. And what does it do? And you got to kind of look at the table and see, oh, well, the more the temperature goes up, the more they take the timing down. Now, they don't explain why, they just do.
But the engineering school should help you.
Yeah, so now you go back and you say, okay, well, if I was doing thermodynamics and I get into combustion takes place faster when there's higher temperatures available. So if you start warmer, things happen quicker.
Evaporation and everything.
Well, not just the fuel evaporate, but like the literal pyrolysis. So as a flame goes, the conflagration from kernel near the spark plug
to the whole flame,
all the way through the chamber until it quenches out at the wall. And it's an oversimplification to say that it's just this simple straight line path, because it's not. But at a very simple level of discussion, okay, it takes a certain amount of time to get from point A out to the wall. And if it's hotter, it stands to reason that it's easier to burn things that are already warmed up, right? So, if we take a burger out of the freezer and put it on the grill, and we take another one at room temperature and put it on the grill, which one's done first?
Right.
So that table's playing the angle on that, right? Just simple heat transfer in physics. Except they didn't label it, so actually they don't spell that out to you. It's just expected that you know that if you're the OEM guy responsible for the table. And that OEM guy's probably been doing that for a while, so yes, he knows that. Us knuckleheads on the aftermarket go, it's taking all my timing away. I want to run more timing. Why is it -5 from this? Well, that -5 is there for a reason, because the physics of warmer air and fuel mixtures burn quicker. So we don't have to lead it as much, kind of like shooting ski. So we had to kind of learn by doing on those tables and figure out how it all kind of all gelled together. And so you start learning this painful lesson that the number of the base spark table is not your timing that you deliver to the car. It's the starting point for the discussion. And like any negotiation, it may go up or down along the way until you get to a final. And you have to be okay with that. And embracing that process was a big part of the learning curve for me. And understanding and going, oh, okay. Because if they throw another curveball at you, let's say a future engine comes out and they're moving the camshaft around.
Right, that's a whole nother can of worms there.
But moving the cam not only changes the pumping efficiency, but let's assume we counted the airflow right because we've got a mass air meter. But when the compression process starts, phases with the cam. So how much squeezing did it get before the ignition point? Well, it's a variable. And does that help or does it hurt? I don't know. But all I know is that if I turn the camshaft, I probably need to turn the distributor too, all else being equal. So it doesn't surprise me that there's a table for that. Now the question is, what do they put in it? Right? And so, again, the OEM guys have a lot of time. They invented it, and they have millions and millions in resources to play with this. So they tested it, and they've got a pretty good answer for how much they would add or subtract based on some other input. And that's why OEM cars run pretty well, because there's a team of people who have probably 3 years to sit there and play with it on the dyno before you ever even see a car at the showroom.
Right. And then that has to work in several cars, or hundreds of thousands of cars, over different environments, different fuel, and it all has to work properly.
Yeah, so you're getting one calibration for a fleet.
And do you know, would they change the calibration per country? I know because certain emission standards, certain things, or are they pretty much all?
So the basics of fuel air spark, if you don't change the hardware on the car, the base cal is usually the same. Different countries have different requirements for OBD reporting and diagnostics, and they may have different emission standards, which force us to sand on a few tables a little bit differently. But fundamentally, like what cam angle you want at what speed and what load,
That's all I'm gonna say.
it's usually going to be pretty much carryover across. Like even within the U.S., we've got, in some cases, we've got federal 50 state cal, and then we've got what we call green state cal, because sometimes California has a tighter standard, and there are 17 states that follow the California standard. And up for debate on whether Congress and the president decide to let that keep existing. That's a political argument. I don't care, whatever. But there's a different standard. So the same exact hardware could be calibrated to 2 different standards, and it just means that they had to do a couple more little trade-offs to make this one cleaner for some of these versus others, or it may just have more catalyst on it when they sell the vehicle. It may just get a cat with more palladium and rhodium in it.
That was something I was kind of going to is, aren't some vehicles the catalyst is different between different areas?
Yes,
Different
sometimes.
countries.
Sometimes, yes. So one of the easiest ways to just clean up the emissions on a vehicle is to just pay for more precious metal in the brake. And it's easily said, but that's a lot of dollars.
Oh, yeah.
Multiply times a fleet. So if you were making pickup trucks, high volume, right? An OEM might make $1 million of a certain pickup truck in a year. And if each truck, the price went up by $100,
Right.
that
Million.
you now have the vice president and the president's attention for the company, right?
Right.
That, are we sure we want to do this? Because that's a lot of extra money. Are we going to be able to charge more? Do we have to charge more just to break even here on what we're doing here? So that's a very real concern. And so you're a hero if you can find a way to avoid that by doing something with the keyboard. But in some cases, that is the answer, right? They just got to put more loading into the catalyst. And like at one point, rhodium, one of the magic ingredients in the catalyst, was like $14,000 an ounce.
Jesus. Yeah.
So
we're not sprinkling any of that in there.
well, it's in there
No,
because
I'm saying extra. We're not sprinkling extra.
but
in
it
there.
works. That's the thing that makes the oxides of nitrogen go down,
Okay.
right? That's one of the, that's the magic dust. And so
rhodium, platinum, and palladium.
typically those are the 3.
Okay.
So there's some nickel because it's there's stainless, and so some things react with nickel, but that's a graduate level discussion. Generally platinum, palladium, rhodium, and so rhodium gets really expensive. The other ones are kind of gold pricing, which is not super cheap either.
Yeah.
So if you need to use more of that, it costs a lot, right? Especially as you multiply it by the volumes in a fleet. It's not that you're buying one pair of cats for your car. It is hundreds of thousands of catalysts that must be purchased every year for that vehicle, right? And look, if you don't pass emissions, you don't have a program. The car doesn't sell.
Or you can just do like Volkswagen and just.
Yeah, different story. I mean, so every manufacturer somewhere along the way
Obviously
has some sort of story like that, right?
It's just like NASCAR.
It
Yeah.
is, unfortunately.
It's only cheating if you get caught.
And so when I wrote my 3rd book, my publisher called it OBD and diagnostics and emissions, and really I thought the title should have been backwards. It should have been emissions and diagnostics and OBD, because OBD only exists because of the requirement that manufacturers should demonstrate that their car is still clean. The
Just
object-
trying to make it to where it was easier for the testing.
Yeah, so if your car is doing things that make it not clean, we want to alert the driver and then tell the technician how to fix it, right? So we got to kind of point them in the right direction. Oh, oxygen sensor bank 1, sensor 2 is bad. Okay, cool. We can kind of zero in, find the bad part and replace it. But the rule is that if your emissions get beyond a certain level, usually like 1.5 times the standard, then you must set the check engine light. And that's why that stuff is there. So the OBD requirement is there, but in that book, when I was talking about that, there's an area of the book where I was talking about various manufacturers and their famous emission scandals. So yes, Volkswagen's Dieselgate is in there.
Yeah.
However, there's other things that happen. There was a lean cruise thing that Ford did.
But which is still in Europe, but not here, right?
No, not anymore.
No? Okay.
So Europe for a while didn't have as tight of an oxide and nitrogen standard as the US did. With Euro 5, Euro 6, and going forward, they're as tighter. So that's gone. So there were some variants in Europe that were allowed to do lean crews, because when you run lean, you make more oxides than nitrogen. But here in the States, it wouldn't fly. And now with the new standards, either place, it doesn't matter. You can't get away with that. But there were like lean crews, turbo BMWs, right? And so the original DI 6-cylinder BMWs were central injection, and they had lean crews in Europe. But when they sold the same car here in the States, they had to be homogeneous. They couldn't run lean at cruise. Because the oxides and the nitrogen just go through the roof.
Is it just from the heat, or?
Yeah, so slightly higher combustion temp, and it gets hot enough to break the N2 molecule that you're breathing right now.
And that's the NOx emissions, right?
The N2 breaks apart in ends, and oxygen, when oxygen is in combustion, it will go home with almost anyone. So oxygen finds the nitrogen, they hook up and they go home together, and that's not good. Right? We want N2s, we want CO2s out the tailpipe. We want two oxygens to find carbon and just go home together. And we don't want them dating the nitrogens, because those are bad.
It's toxic couples.
Yeah. So, but oxygen's a little bit of a slut. She'll go home with anyone. So, at any rate, to kind of get back on target, so Ford had this deal where they had a lean cruise that was enabled in certain conditions, but wouldn't show up in the lab. Right. GM had a thing where certain enrichment things happened when the hood was closed, but not when the hood was open. Because when you're running an emissions lab, the hood is open.
Right.
And they know that, and
so
now
it's just like NASCAR.
It's a lot. There's a lot of smoke
Just
unit
a
type
lot
stuff
more,
there. I love the smoke unit stories too, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of overlap in that Venn diagram, right? So they've all kind of dabbled with what can we get away with. The problem is now, EPA and ARB are really sharp about this, and the idea that you would be violating the spirit of the law is enough to get you in trouble. So now we have to declare all of these possible either devices or strategies, and we have to give them this phone book thick list of things going on in the ECU as a manufacturer, and we have to say, hey, under these conditions, it looks at this and this, and it might do this. But we tested it, and we can prove that even though that's happening, the tailpipe is clean. But if we don't declare it, and they find it, now it's a problem. Now we're guilty until proven innocent.
Right.
And that Volkswagen thing just did not make that any easier. And so there's a EPA version of that where we have to do what are called AETCs, and in the EU they have a thing called AES, and they're almost the same thing. And so they want to know what are these strategies and tell me what your thing does. And so you kind of gotta open the books to them a little bit and say, here's what it's doing, but we promise that when you test it, it's going to be clean. And so making something that passes that standard, the margin between pass-fail is pretty thin these days.
Yeah, significantly less than what it was just, 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, you can go back and see, what emissions bin did they cert to, but when LS1 came out, for example, it was 1997 in a Corvette, right? So the 1997 federal emission standards compared to today are a joke.
Yeah.
It's not super tight, but the LS1 was way cleaner than the LT1 it replaced because it just had a more efficient combustion system, right? And it was done to improve the emissions. It's just that the byproduct
of
was
efficiency
horsepower.
is horsepower.
Yeah. So it was great for us as enthusiasts, right? We win on that one, but their real driver was they knew because they can look years ahead and they know what the future standard is going to be. And if they say, hey, we're developing a whole new engine platform, we want to make sure that through the life of this platform, it's got a path to potentially pass.
Right. That way, at least they don't have to end it and go to something else.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and so every new emissions bin that comes out, you'll see there are engine standards that a company will make a new engine, and they're looking at not only what are the emissions today, but what are the emissions going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as this thing still exists. Because if we are not fundamentally clean enough in the combustion chamber, I now spend money on platinum, palladium, and rhodium.
Well, because it all has to start from the beginning, right?
Yeah, so I
The
mean,
engine's got to be at some level pretty dang efficient, because you can't just take a small block and throw a cat on it and pass an emissions test.
well, it depends on what emissions test, right? So I mean, given enough
And
cats,
it's not.
cats are the magic cleanup crew, right? But you don't want to rely on it, right? You want to leave the least amount of mess for the catalyst to clean up.
Right.
So the more complete and even your combustion is inside the chamber, the less your cleanup crew has to do in the exhaust system on the way out, right? And that's, so when I do a new program, I occasionally do work for a company that say, hey, we got to go get our carbo. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is try and make that thing run as clean as it can on raw engine out.
Mhm.
And so if raw engine out is clean, then the catalyst has less to do. Right? If I'm sloppy, then I occasionally get these rich breakthroughs or lean breakthroughs. And those breakthroughs are cases where we've saturated the catalyst one direction. All the rich sites are occupied. And if I keep going rich for a while after that, well, it goes into the catalyst and right out because it doesn't have any site to sit on and wait for something lean to mix with and clean up later.
Well, doesn't that at some point heat the cat up to a point where it just has to have a thermal meltdown at some point?
So the heat in the catalyst comes from the reactions. Right?
Right.
Same as heat in the chamber, right? It's just that our chambers are liquid cooled in the engine. Your
Right.
catalyst is only cooled by the air on the outside of it. So if you dump a lot of heat into a catalyst and you can't air cool it by enough, you're going to melt something.
Right.
So, but the heat that forms in the catalyst is literally unburned bits of fuels with unburned bits of air or oxygen, right? And when those are in the catalyst in presence of each other and enough heat, then they react and they release their heat. And they react and hopefully they boil back down to carbon dioxide and water,
Mhm.
right? That's the perfect situation.
Well, the byproduct of like perfect combustion is H2O, right?
And carbon dioxide.
Right.
So
You get those guys that dial in an old carbureted car and it's super clean and you got water dripping off the tailpipe. And
perfect.
That's emissions.
That's perfectly normal.
Somebody told me that a long time ago and I was like, what?
Yeah, so most of the time our exhaust is hot enough that you don't see it as a liquid. It comes out as a vapor.
Right.
Right? So I mean if it's over 212 degrees Fahrenheit, it's gonna be steam.
That's why a nice good cold start, nice crisp clean is
Yeah.
vapor.
Yes.
'Cause
And
it's
so
also
it's
hot.
not, people say, oh, it's smoking. Well, is it smoke or is it water vapor?
Right.
It's, if you look at the cooling towers from a nuke plant, right, it's just water vapor.
Yeah.
They're just clouds. So that's not bad. In fact, that's good. That's what we aim for. And the funny thing is, like on an emissions test, right now today, on the current standard, we are measured by what are called criteria pollutants. So you have non-methane organic gases, you have oxides of nitrogen, you have particulate matter, and you have carbon monoxide. You can make as much CO2 as you want. There is no limit. So CO2 is a product of perfect clean combustion. So you can make all the CO2 you want. The only place CO2 comes into discussion is when they talk fuel economy or greenhouse gas discussions, because perfect combustion leads to CO2. And so the tree huggers that want to argue CO2 rises, causes our global warming, climate shift, whatever you want to call it this week. Yeah, okay, you can try and argue that CO2 levels in Earth's atmosphere move up, move down, or whatever. And, we've got all these nice green things outside here. I forget what they're called. All the little
Filters.
They have like these trunks that go into the
Yeah,
ground,
yeah.
whatever, and they eat the CO2 and they poop out oxygen. It's crazy. So it's kind of cool. It's, what do we call it? A renewable resource. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's not so bad, but what they don't eat is carbon monoxide. They don't eat organic gases. They don't eat oxides of nitrogen. So we want to not put the bad things out there. So, I mean, yes, if we want to improve fuel economy, we would burn less total fuel. Even if you burn the fuel perfectly, you would make CO2, right? So that's not necessarily the problem for us because we're not graded on that, at least in the emissions world. Now OEMs, absolutely, they've got corporate average fuel economy they have to meet for the fleet, and certain models can only do so much. And if they can get a 1/10 of a mile per gallon here or there on a vehicle, it matters, and it's part of their score that they're graded on somewhere else. Now they can make a vehicle that gets a little bit bad on the fuel economy and still sell it. You cannot be 1% over on the emissions requirement and sell it.
It's just that strict. It's
Yeah,
black and white.
and actually as an OEM, you're not going to come anywhere near the standard, right? 1%, 10%, you don't want to be anywhere near there. You want to be like half.
Yeah.
You want to be like so clean that no matter what vehicle they pick from the fleet to audit you on, that any vehicle they could pick from anywhere out there in the fleet, and it could have, if your emission standard is full useful life at 150,000 miles, they could go find a vehicle with 130,000 miles on it and it better pass, or else.
Yeah. I guess what I'm curious is how do you branch from the performance, right? I know you wanted to run better, right?
Mm-hmm.
To the interest in the emissions, because that's not a natural path, I wouldn't think.
So, I mean, we don't have a program at the OEM side that doesn't pass emissions. So, new Corvette 01's over 1,000 horsepower, but it passes emissions.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it makes 800 or 1,000. If it fails the emissions bin that it's certified for, it doesn't exist. Right? They couldn't build a 400 horsepower engine if it didn't pass emissions. So it's not optional. It is an absolute requirement to have a program on the OEM side.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is what from university, where did you go first, and is that what structured you down the path that you went?
Oh, I was into performance first, without a doubt. Yeah, making more horsepower is always fun.
What was it the first job? What was the first place that you went to work after that?
Weirdly, my first experience in calibration was on my own. It wasn't as an OEM guy. I didn't join an OEM Cal team until after I had been doing a lot of aftermarket tuning work for years before I got an OEM job. So I had a brief period where I was doing some powertrain supplier stuff. I was doing like accessory drives, and I had started my own shop, and I got busy enough. I bought a dyno, and I had software, and friends turned into friends, and now the public is finding you because there's not that many people that can do this, let alone do it right. And so I got busy enough that I was just doing that full time. But again, without OEM support, right? You're just using whatever tools and trying to talk to people who you got to figure out, do they know what they're talking about or not? Mm-hmm. And do I believe what they're saying on, we changed this to get that result? And I had a couple of customers and then another business contact who were OEM guys. And the absolute game changer was like, Jared Robleski came to the shop I was working at, and SCT was brand new. And so Jerry and 3 other dudes had started this company called SCT. They branched off from Superchips, and they had, this is our own thing. It's different, it's separate, but look at all this that we give you. I was very familiar with the Chipmaster software. This was mostly aimed at Ford guys. So I'm like, okay, all the things I'm used to seeing in Chipmaster are there, but you got more. And you got some labels on here. And then Jerry sat down with me and spent a couple hours with me going over, okay, this does this, and this does this. And if you put this in here, now you can concentrate on this over here. And the light bulb went over my head about a dozen times, very rapidly. That's how you can get it, So now in hot weather, cold weather, it just stays the same. Well, you get the mass air meter, right? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, it's just measuring the airflow. So if you get more airflow or less airflow, it doesn't matter. The meter reads it and sends the right signal to the ECU and does all its math.
Because all the other modifiers are doing what they need to do.
Yeah, and like SCT was one of the first places where they said, here, we'll give you data for 42-pound injectors versus 60-pound injectors versus whatever else, right? And they made it easy for us to kind of copy paste that data in. It wasn't perfect, but hot damn, it was a lot better than what we had been dealing with before. I mean, at one point we were like, well, if we put 42s on a Mustang GT, just take 42 over 19. Must be right. And, we know better now, right? Now I run things on the bench over there, and that bench runs the complete cycle across a range of voltages, gives me all the data, and it gives me an Excel sheet that I can copy and paste into any tuning software that I'm using on like 10 different control system standards, plus standalones. Right? So that that was one of those key things, was like, okay, we need to know what the fuel injector does. And we're going to assume the fuel delivery is right. And then we're going to solve for airflow. And that's one of the very fundamental things we do as tuners. It doesn't matter if I'm doing this on 100 horsepower or if you're doing this on 1500 horsepower. Right? Somewhere along the way, you put a stake in the ground and say, I believe my fuel delivery is X, my ratio is Y, therefore my airflow has to be Z.
Right. So it's just the same thing. Something that I kind of touch on, just given like a basic, right? It's like, look, if your injector data is right, you know, and I can be wrong. If I'm wrong, feel free to let me know. But the way I look at the grams per cylinder is around 1.0 is where you start crossing that threshold into boost. I look at it as like a 0 to 100% efficiency, and then past that.
So you can actually do the math on that, right? So take the cylinder volume times the density of air at standard conditions. So you got grams per cc, you know how many cc's per cylinder. That will tell you how many grams per cylinder is the 100% line on an engine. Now, on a 7-liter V8, it works out that it's almost exactly 1.0. So it's a really happy point to know, right? But it's a smaller number on a 5.7, right? Somewhere in between on a 6.2.
But it's in the, I guess what I'm saying is it's in the ballpark. So say you've got, you know, you got a supercharged LS3, right? Or let's say turbo LS3. And, right? And say,
Told them we already got one.
and say you're making 14 pounds of boost.
Oh,
And
that's a lot.
you've got your injector data wrong, and you're 14 pounds of boost, but you're seeing like 0.8 grams per cylinder. So you should know that at 14 pounds of boost, if you're only seeing 0.8 grams per cylinder, something's probably not right.
Unless it's intentionally scaled. So yes, at a face value calibration, you are right.
You should be in
Yes,
that ballpark.
it should jive. And so any error that you put in at the beginning, at step 1 of type in your injector data, before you do anything else and start solving for things, it will compound into additional errors down the.
Well, that's what
down
I'm
the
getting
path.
at. Is it seems like I see a lot of times where I'm like, oh, this is an LSA and it's on 16 pounds of boost, and we're only seeing, it's got big injectors in it, and we're only seeing like 0.8, 0.7, and then they'll cut the whole timing table and just shift it way up. And I'm like, so you just killed the resolution all because you didn't put the data in properly. Had you put the data in properly, you could have utilized your entire table and everything would have scaled how it is. So even if you
there's
adjust that table,
there are-
you're messing up other things in the background.
Yeah, there are multiple ways to do the scaling exercise. So one of the things we get off the reservation at some point because we go into uncharted territory where the OEM, in this case GM, never anticipated us to go. At one point, GM, the way they wrote their software, the biggest number you could enter into the table for injector flow rate was 8.0 grams per second. They didn't make any car that used an injector that was bigger than 8 grams per second.
Right.
So why would they make software that goes any further than 8? So when we, like idiots, come in and we put an injector in that's 10 or 12 grams per second on actual flow rate, and if you can only put in 8, and the thing really flows 10, you're missing something, right?
Right.
And that something you're missing is now going to be baked into everything you do going forward. Whether you admit it or not, whether you actually scale it or not, I assure you that the actual flow rate is 10. Just because you typed in an 8 doesn't mean, and you know, sometimes the background modifiers still can't get you past 8. They clip at 8. Everything is just, the computer runs out of fingers and toes for that variable, and it's as high as that number can go. Some guys play a game with moving the stoic rate and all this stuff. I like to scale the masses because scaling the masses keeps everything on track. Because usually those same ECUs run out of airflow at 512 grams per second.
Right.
So if you make 513, it reports as 512. If you make 600, it reports as 512. And
It always takes less value and carries.
Yeah, so it doesn't know, and so if you get a good air day or a bad air day, it's still going to be 512.
That's when we're living on the fuel pressure regulator, hoping that one-to-one works. Look, it's not the best way, but there's sacrifices.
Even if it wasn't fuel price, even if it wasn't boost level, let's just say it was July versus January.
Right.
It's colder. It's the same pressure, but the density is different because of temperature.
Well, I think one thing, and you could speak from this from experience. I can't. But the first time you actually saw what's in an OE calibration.
versus like what we have in HB tuners.
Oh my God, it's a labyrinth.
I was gonna say, what do we have? You know, let's say on a great operating system with HB tuners, maybe 1,000 tables.
It's cute.
Right? That's what I'm saying. So the factory file, you know, and obviously the factory file is mostly modifiers and save their asses and.
Well, no, there's a bunch of stuff that you should never touch that's in there.
There's stuff in HB tuners you should never touch too.
Well, also,
But you know, people touch.
but I mean, you say you might see 1,000, and there could be 16, 20,000 in the
Right.
actual ECU.
So the first time
Yeah,
you
right.
ever saw that,
There's someone
What kind of-
30,000 plus out there.
what kind of like mind state does that put you? Because
Well,
when I first heard about that and was told about it, I'm just like, oh, so we're just playing a game. Like we're just toying with this. We're not.
Yeah, so
That's
I mean,
the
that's
difference
also,
between calibration and tuning.
yeah, but there's no one person at the OEM who knows all 20,000 of those
Well, there's
things.
specific people for each part. Right?
Yeah, so it gets you learn your sliver of it. So you're the closed loop fuel guy. You are the spark and knock guy. You are the VVT guy, right? That's your slice of the cal that you're really good at, and you put your part into the cal, and he puts his part in, and she puts her part in, and some guy brings them all together and says, okay, this is everyone's together, here's the new release, now go find the bugs from there. And you updated your stuff based on the best information you had at the time, but now when they change their stuff, now it's a different input to yours.
And then we'll make it and some of that shows. So you know, same year vehicle will have like a little different on the operating system, but then one change you're making. So I'll say, and for instance, 2012 CTSV, from what I can see, has maybe four, but 3 different operating systems that I've seen. And if you took something I've watched people do all the time, if you take everything out of 2012, this operating system, and then you take this and you paste it over here, you're not getting that same result.
No,
Because
'cause
there's
there may be-
something in the background that we didn't know about, and this
Precisely.
is something that I think people overlook. So when you're modifying, you need to modify individually, things like that. That's
yeah,
why.
don't take it for granted. And so my buddy Gordon does a bunch of Hellcat stuff and Dodge stuff, right? And just like any manufacturer, there's changes release to release within a model year. And then there are model year updates, right? But you could be halfway through a model year and they may make a big change.
Yeah.
And so there are guys out there who will copy paste as their method of tuning, right?
Well, I see it between different years.
Yeah,
I'm
they
don't
we
do
just
that.
put these throttle values in. And the reality is you don't need that exact value, you need plus 10% on something.
Right. Right.
And that's a far better way to look at it. But in reality, sometimes you do just have to spend time dialing it in to that combo. Now,
And that's mostly because of what's going on in the background that we can't even see.
yeah, because there's a lot of stuff going on. And that's why it takes 3 years plus to get any vehicle from concept to production, at least, sometimes more. Right? If it's a more complex engine, you may have 3 years on the engine done before it ever went out to the proving grounds, before the in-vehicle people ever get a chance to play with it and drive it.
So when we're seeing things like the ZR1X, that thing's been around for 3 years.
Keep going.
Really?
I mean, the first rumors, when were the first rumors of a dual overhead cam engine?
Oh yeah, that was a while back. 5-6 years, easy.
There you go.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, when they started working on a dope motor, they were working on both in parallel between the Z06 and the ZR1. Right? Because they knew they were going to go dope, and they knew they were going to do an aspirated and a boosted. And they might not have got the boosted one off the ground right away, but certainly a lot of things that applied to the regular aspirated dope motor were carried over. How do we do 4 camshaft control on a 5.5 liter flat plane?
Yeah.
Now, the variable intake, okay, they got rid of that when they added boost. Okay, cool, we don't have to do that part. However, now we have closed loop boost control.
Well, that was the thing, yeah. So, and a lot of that algorithm has, so like on the BMWs, they do pre-throttle, post-throttle boost for, you know, making the pedal a little crispier.
Yes.
And the ZR1 has
Absolutely.
a modified, even arguably better version than that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not new to GM, right? This is not their first turbo engine. Go back and look at their old 2-liter turbos. Go back and look at their V6 turbos.
Mhm.
They all had that. This is not invented yesterday. They've
Right.
just been, so if they take a pair of those 2-liter engines and put them on the same crankshaft, all of a sudden it starts to look like something like this, right? And the same physics apply, it's just that you have to do it twice.
Yeah.
Once on each bank. and you monitor them independently. And they're doing some extra really cool stuff on ZR1 because they're close coupled with the turbo, and
And they're
I haven't seen that close yet.
turbos.
Oh yeah, they're giant, which is awesome. And it's not so much that the compressors are giant, it's that their turbines are giant.
Yeah.
Because like this car,
It's 58, right?
they were 58.5 originally, and I was at choke flow on a pair of 58.5 millimeter turbines.
And you clipped them.
We clipped them, we ported things, everything, and it got me like 30 extra horsepower. Still choke flow. This winter, I finally put 60 millimeter wheels in this thing. So we bored it out to that, and then we went from 10 full blades to 5 blade plus the little half blades, right? So completely different aerodynamics on the turbine side, and a physically larger wheel, so bigger hole to push things through. Radical difference. So I went back to the dyno, changing only the turbos, no cal change, and all of a sudden now it can make the boost, it can flow more. And the only thing that went up was the mass airflow number, but it was like right on target. Like I run this car at Lambda 78. So it gives me decent turbine inlet temps, and it doesn't kill the catalyst. So I'll run a little richer than some people say we can run. That's fine, that's cool, whatever. But it's sparked appropriately for the ratio it runs at. It was Lambda 78 on the choked setup. It was Lambda 78 on the new setup. It picked up way over 100 horsepower to the tires on the dyno. So we were stuck at about 660, 680 on the best run we could do on the old turbos. And I went back to the dyno with the new turbos, and I would have been happy if anything that started with a 7.
Yeah.
We were pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
So anyway, I made like 810 on the first run where it had traction. I'm like, and I hadn't looked at numbers at first, because I'm looking at it, I'm like looking at the mass flow numbers. I'm like, well, that shouldn't be that high. The mass flow is not that high. And then I realized that my normal rule of thumb that I was comparing things was for gasoline. So, our quick and dirty that we look at is usually it's about a 10 to 1 between pounds per minute of airflow and horsepower on gasoline. So if you make 70 pounds per minute, you're making roughly 700 horsepower, raw, indicated before blower losses, whatever. But gives you a ballpark of what to expect. And so when I saw 78 pounds per minute, I'm like, well, it can't be making 800 to the tire. And then I remembered, oh wait, that's for gasoline. And I had like 80% ethanol.
Oh yeah.
And so the ethanol carries oxygens, right? The OH group on the tail end of the ethanol is very real oxygens. So as you put more fuel in, you're putting more oxygen into the combustion chamber. It's party time.
Yeah.
And so yes, same way we tell people when they're sizing their fuel system. If you go from gasoline to ethanol, plan on having 20-30% more fuel system at least to make the same.
And it's pretty spot on that 30%.
Yeah, so that fuel carries some oxygen. So you can't look at only airflow from the mass air meter, it's airflow from the mass air meter plus the chemistry.
Right.
And that's the total heat release available, because all those carbons and hydrogens still find oxygens to dance with. We just added more oxygens to the party.
Similar like an oxygenated fuel, right?
Well,
same thing.
Ethanol is by definition oxygenated.
But what I'm saying is like a,
yes.
MS-109.
Precisely,
like
yeah. And so like years and years
that's
ago.
why those make a little more power than, just
yeah,
like
so
a
funny
C16.
story. I did work probably 12 plus years ago for a World Challenge team. And they flew me out to Arizona, and I was doing the cal work on their LS3 Camaros that were running SCCA World Challenge, which runs with the IndyCar series at the time. So, and they had to breathe through a kind of small restrictor plate. I think it was like 1.6 inch restrictor plate.
Wow.
So we're pulling vacuum at what?
Yeah.
Like
Quite a bit.
So we're down like about 80 kPa up top. Now it's a blueprinted engine, beautiful engine. But their fuel spec at the time was oxygenated. So, we make our first...
Trying to make up a little bit for that.
Yeah, so our first run was like, I ran it like Lambda 87 first run. I'm like, okay, well, here's what it makes at 87. I'm like, well, tell me more about your fuel. And they're like, yeah, it's this. I'm like, oh, it carries oxygen. I'm like, well, we're starved. And I
Add
richly
a little fuel.
So I put 5% more fuel in. Power picked up. Now, I added fuel and I added timing. Because as you go richer, the burn rate gets a little slower. So I offset that with more timing, but it tolerated it without knocking. Cool. And I was releasing more heat because those oxygens found something to dance with. And I went richer, and I went richer, and I went richer. I ran that thing, I ran to 76, naturally aspirated.
Wow.
Because it just kept picking up power as I added fuel to it. Right? Because we were breathing through a 1.6-inch orifice plate in front of the throttle body.
Yeah.
And manifold pressure was down at 80 kPa. But we were back to basically stock LS3 horsepower. And the way SCACA did their balance of power, right? Because they're trying to make us, the Hyundai Kia 2-liter turbo be even with an LS3. So they handicapped the LS3.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, okay.
Well, so that's something.
We'll see about that.
That's something really, really big to touch on is, so I want to make it not such a broad thing, but in the OE level, right, you're going to find a perfect stoic point that is just not putting out too much heat, or because.
So what's your priority, right? So wide open throttle is a narrow sliver of the operating window.
Right.
How much time do you really spend at watt?
Yeah, not a lot.
And in fact, the more power you make,
5%.
the smaller that number gets,
Yes.
right? At 1,000 horsepower, how long could you possibly be at wide open throttle
Half
for?
miles.
Which takes how long again?
You're right.
You spend longer
Yeah.
in staging lanes idling, right?
That's true.
Okay, so as a percentage of the vehicle's life, it's a small number.
Mhm.
So at the OEM, we focus on the big number.
Okay.
So if you're idling, cruising, driving around, part throttle, reasonable acceleration, do I need to do the things that make every last little horsepower out of this?
Well, but then comes the argument that peak power is at peak efficiency. I guess what I'm getting into is
Not
is
necessarily.
when
So
you have
again,
people-
depends on your fuel. So
So let's just say pump 93, right? You get the guys that are like, oh, just add more timing, but at a certain point, you're gonna get to MBT, and you're gonna
going past MBT is not rewarding.
right. But how do you find that in the aftermarket without the tools?
Oh, well, without the tools, it's harder. So in the OEM side, we put cylinder pressure transducers in. We don't get that.
So
we get transducers, and we use either CAS or ADL Indicom. Those are the magic things. Right? There's a couple other tools out there that one could use. I get it, but those are the big hitters, right? So if you're an OEM development engineer, you know what ADL Indicom is, and you've used it. You will know what a CA50 number is, because we don't even look at MBT.
We don't look at spikes, right?
We don't look at location of peak pressure. We look at CA50, crank angle for 50% burn. We see the heat release trace, and that tells us what we're doing inside the cylinder. So there's a magic spot for a combustion system where you want to put that.
So how does one find that in the aftermarket?
I mean, the real answer is if you wanted to, if you have a load-bearing dyno, and let's say we had a standalone ECU where we could virtually twist the distributor in real time.
Oh, so follow the torque.
Right, and you could just sit there steady state. You could put the car in third gear going 2,000 RPM at 30% throttle, and it's it might be 70 kPa or whatever, right? And you hold it there so airflow is steady, and your fuel is whatever it needs to be right on stoic. And now all we twist is the distributor, basically.
Right.
Right. At some point, there's going to be some spark advance that gives you the most torque for the same airflow at the tires. That is, by definition, MBT. Now, if you were to instrument it while you were doing this, and you were looking at in-cylinder pressure transducers, you would see that the CA50 number is probably about 7 to 9 degrees, because that's just how it works.
Yeah.
Right, so we skip all the nonsense, the noise factors and everything, we just measure right here. But this is expensive.
Oh yeah.
And it's difficult, and it's finicky equipment, and it's got its own maintenance schedule.
Well, and I guess the next factor comes in is if your timing is, and so a lot of us, we'll read a lot like a spark plug, right?
Mhm.
And I'll be like, oh, that timing looks high on that plug, but what if I was a little too lean on air fuel?
Well, yeah, and
Because I don't think
what's the last thing that imprinted on that plug?
the peak timing or
Was
the
it?
idle timing.
Well, yeah,
The idle timing.
right before you shut it off.
Right.
So you might have maxed it.
Well, that's
So
why I
plugs
say
is
let out,
nice.
kill it.
Reading plugs is nice. Well, are you going to do that on a turbo while the turbos are still going 80,000 RPM and you just shut the engine off?
Sadly,
Let
I've
them
done
spin
that,
more.
and now that you say that, it sounds like a terrible idea. But I guess in my mind, what I'm doing is just I found
I've
enough.
got this
I found
wonderful
enough.
appreciation for what the old school carburetor guys did to tune engines, right? I get it, because that's the only tool they had at the time, right? At the OEM, you would get laughed out of the building if you suggest any such thing. Now, we don't have those tools in the
But we're
aftermarket.
limited tools. So how do we go about? How would you suggest somebody goes about finding the ideal?
Well, here's the
stoic and the ideal
really,
timing.
well, stoic's easy because even narrowband sensors will bring you to stoic.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I'm sorry.
but timing, the really cool part is engines want to run. You can be off by quite a bit, it'll still run.
Yeah.
You can be off by 5-10 degrees, either way, still runs, still drives okay. You'd be off by, you'd be off by 2 to 5 degrees and probably never feel the seat of the pants difference as a driver. Slight difference in fuel economy, and you're not measuring emissions, you may never know. And your customer may never know. I mean, you just got to get close enough, and that's good. And look, if we got a big cam with some overlap,
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
right? All bets are off. Like, how much natural EGR does it have at that RPM? Because the ram tuning's different at this speed versus that speed, right? And so what turns into poor combustion at idle might be tons of scavenging at 2,500 RPM and just awesome cylinder filling at 5,000 RPM,
Right.
right? Just based on the dynamics of the intake and exhaust port and the valve vents, right? And so you could be off by a few degrees in timing, and it still works, right? So the answer becomes very empirical. And so, if you're tuning big cam cars, obviously more displacement swallows it easier. But if you have a bigger cam on a smaller displacement, this gets harder. Turn the thing 5 degrees either way, see what happens. Add 5 degrees, did it make it better? Take five away from where you started, did that make it better? You might find that, okay, well, it's just, the MBT point really did move kind of far over here, and you just got, not be afraid to kind of go over there and see. And once you get within a few degrees, hey, close enough.
But do you feel like I guess what I'll just say my process is I kind of put it a little on the richer side of where I guess the norm would be. So like, let's just say, I've seen people that are tuning the LT stuff in the 12.7, 12.8 range, and I'm like, 12.5, 12.
And why?
What?
Okay, why? So I was talking about part throttle.
No.
So at part throttle, you can be off by a lot. Now watt, you're going to take a torque measurement, right? So you're going to add 2 degrees of timing and see, did it pick up torque and did it light up the knock sensor, right? You want the most torque without showing up on the knock sensor.
Right.
So assuming you would trust the knock sensor.
If we say we're going to go in this hypothetical 1 degree, and that 1 degree gives us 15, and then we add one more and it gives us 15, and we add one more and it gives us 7. At that point, are we reaching MBT or have we passed MBT?
Well, I would run the least amount of timing necessary to get on that plateau for torque.
Right,
that
because
gives
we're
you a
talking
little
2
bit of
degrees
margin.
just gave us 30 horsepower, or let's say 30 foot-pounds, right? But then that one more extra degree only gave us 7. Does that mean that
Oh,
we're
okay. So you're
approaching
getting,
all-
okay. You're talking delta on each one. Sorry,
Yeah.
I was thinking total. You're absolutely, there are diminishing returns, right? As you get
Right.
closer and closer to optimum. And I'm always going to back off from that a little bit.
But is
based
that
on
an
my
indicator
experience.
of MBT?
It's either MBT or the knock limit, right? And wide open throttle, you're going to hit one or the other.
Are they not related?
No.
Okay.
Because if you have poor fuel quality, let's say you put 87 in it, the knock limit comes down, way down really fast. But MBT is kind of driven by the hardware of the engine, right? And how you get the stuff into the cylinder and what ratio you're prepared to run. It's just that we can't get to that actual MBT number because that invisible line of knock is in the way. And we cross that and you get abnormal combustion. We don't get the D word. D word almost never happens in engines. I need to write another article in the future about that. But knock gets in our way. Now, if you were to turn around and run C16, knock limit's probably sky high. And so in many
Same thing with
cases,
E85. That's what I was trying to get at. Is
partially. Now, the
is-
E85 is not as high as you would hope. It's
It's
well over
120.
100. No, on a good day, ethanol, pure ethanol, on a good day would be 112 to 116
Right.
on a good day.
But the reason we're making more power with ethanol is the oxygen
And the cooling.
and the fuel mass.
And the cooling.
Right.
So the latent heat of vaporization of ethanol is significantly higher than gasoline. So when the fuel goes from a liquid to a vapor, it pulls heat out of the environment to do that. It's an endothermic reaction. So it's like another intercooler.
Right.
So it's awesome, and methanol does even more. And water does even more than methanol, right? So
Well, and you kind of went in exactly what I was pushing there, right? Is a lot of people think that MBT and NOC are the same, but they're not,
No.
because NOC is related to what octane or what you can get out of it. MBT is just what the design of the engine is.
yeah,
So, but you can, on 93, you may not be able to get MBT, and that's why when we go to an ethanol or a C16, our NOC is raised, our threshold is much higher. So now we're able to hit MBT and
yeah. The
make
easiest
significant
way to
gains.
visualize this is look at Ford controls. So step out of your GM world for just a
No,
moment.
I like it. I know where you're going. Go ahead.
Ford is pretty smart. They have multiple sets of spark tables, right? And
It's multiple. That's a little understatement.
well, variable cam aside, even if I go back to a 5-liter pushrod engine or a 462 valve, they've always had a base timing table that really represented MBT. And then they had another table called borderline knock.
Mm-hmm.
And then they might have another one called max allowed, because they might have a different reason to limit. But using all of their vast OEM tools, they populate these tables. And so you can see that at light load, if you were at 2,500 RPM, 30% load on the engine, just kind of cruising down the road, the borderline knock number is like 55 degrees. It's stupid high, but MBT might be 30 degrees.
Because if you could get 30, that would be.
There's no reason to run 32, right?
Right.
Because it gives you the peak in the right place in the cycle to push on that piston with the most force during the power stroke to get the most energy out of the combustion into the crankshaft.
So why is it allowed 55?
Now, it allows 55, but you wouldn't pick it. So their logic says always use the lower of what's available.
Okay.
Right? So 55 is the knock limit, because at part throttle, you could advance the shit out of the distributor.
It'll take it, just won't
It
produce any more power.
Yeah, it just kind of lays over, because what happens is you light that mixture during the compression stroke.
Hmm.
It's trying to burn and expand while you're trying to squeeze it. Well, that's pumping losses.
Yeah.
And so the more that you do, the more pumping losses you add, which means you have less net power from the power stroke on the way out. Right? So it's a bad trade-off to over advance the timing, even though it's not knocking.
Right.
Because the load is so light that the knock's not really there. It's not going to hurt the engine. The in-cylinder pressure and temperature don't get beyond the auto ignition point for the end gases, because you didn't have enough stuff in there anyway. Now, go to 6,000 RPM wide open throttle. Different story.
Yep.
Right? Now we have a lot of stuff in the cylinder, relatively speaking, and MBT might be 30 degrees up there. However, the knock limit for what it was cal for, so 91 or 93 fuel on a good day, a lot of these were cal for 87, but let's say it's premium fuel, the knock limit is 26 degrees, even though MBT is 30. Which one do we want to run?
26.
Yeah, the lower of the two.
Right.
Because I don't want to break it. Right? Knock breaks things.
Right.
Two things kill engines, knock and RPM. We control both. So we don't want to knock it. We pick the knock limit is the lower of the two numbers. Now, if I take that same engine, knowing that the knock limit is 26, but MBT is 30, if I turn around and put some 100 octane fuel in it, and I recalibrate only the knock limit table, do I expect to pick up power on the car?
Well, I don't know, because wouldn't it still pick the lower number?
Yeah, but I moved the lower number.
Oh, you moved the lower. Okay.
Right,
I thought
so
you were saying you moved.
so if I recalibrate to a new knock limit,
Yep.
and now the knock limit is 32, but MBT was 30. Well, now I can run the 30, where it could only get to 26 before.
Right.
And those 4 extra degrees probably matter at full load at 6,000 RPM, right? And it, as we put a supercharger on, it just magnifies everything, right? So the same story happens everywhere, right? Now, whether we have 2 discretely separate tables in the control logic, like Ford does, or we bake it all into our high octane spark surface in a GM control system, which by the way has been the same since the 90s.
Yeah.
Right, that part of the logic has not changed as we went from LT1 to Gen 2, Gen 3 to Gen 4 to Gen 5 and whatever else they got coming.
Well, it kind of reminds me of like the relationship of, not to super oversimplify, but like the traction control philosophy of a Motec versus the traction control philosophy of a Holley. It's like this one's trying to correct the problem after it's already happened. It's already knocked. It's gonna, no, let me fix that. Where Motec is like, that's gonna happen if I go there. Let me make sure I
So
fix this ahead of time.
you
So
have
Ford
a
is the Motec,
feed forward control loop,
right?
or you have a reactive proportional derivative
Which is
that look at an error and try and fix the error.
but the error has already happened.
So my way when I teach PID loops to people is we always want to drive the error to 0 before we start doing any correction. The best way to tune a PID loop is to not tune a PID loop.
Right.
Just make your first guess right.
Once you're already there,
Yeah.
you're already having
So what happens when you overstep or understep, right? And this could be idle control, could be boost control. There's lots of things that use PIDs, right? Fuel pump, logic, whatever. They use all over the place in automotive controllers. So if we understand that an engine was knock limited and we weren't running enough timing because we're respecting the knock limit, then going to a better fuel quality and slightly more timing allows us to do that. So like this car, when I put flex fuel in it, right? So my base high octane table is there for 91 octane because I might not be able to get 93 somewhere.
Right.
However, there is an ethanol adder table, right? And so if
there's the flex fuel table, and then there's the power enrichment.
Well, the power enrichment still is kind of the same for me between the two, but the flex fuel table is the thing that takes into account the octane and the chemistry.
So you bring that up, and something, I'm going to tell you how I argue it, and again, if I'm wrong, feel free to say it. So when we go to flex fuel, I will add timing to the entire table. And in my mind, it's because we're on alcohol-based fuel, we're running a little bit more fuel, we need to get that flame lit off. I'm only talking 2-3 degrees, but over the whole beginning of it as well, because drivability, in my mind, is we're on alcohol-based fuel, we can get closer to MBT that way, and if we leave the same timing that we did on pump gas,
if I'm at 30% load, was I knock limited? Just cruising down the road at 40 miles an hour, park throttle, 20%.
Probably not.
No. So I believe that the GM people were probably pretty smart. If I was running a stock engine, that the timing value that they have at about 30% load, or 0.2 something, 0.3 something still air, that number is pretty close to MBT. It's not pushed down because of a knock limit down there. When it get way into the boosted region, it's a different discussion. But down there, I don't need to worry about the knock limit regardless of what the fuel is.
I'm looking more towards getting closer to MBT, getting better efficiency out of the motor.
So, and again, you can be off by a few degrees and the car still runs great.
Mm-hmm.
However, alcohol actually has a faster flame speed than gasoline.
But there's more mass. Okay.
Doesn't matter because you're at lambda 1 usually. You're closed loop. You're going to stoic. So it's just evenly distributed chunks of oxygens and carbons and hydrogens within the cylinder, and there's a bunch of nitrogens floating around from the party because they have to be there. But the propagation from the spark plug out towards the wall goes through this evenly mixed stuff, and the relative rate of that propagation for the same temperature and pressure, regardless of how much stuff there is, because remember, there's more fuel, but the fuel is carrying oxygens with it.
Right.
So if you go grab Dr. Haywood's 900-page book and you look at laminar flame speed of ethanol versus laminar flame speed of isooctane, you will see there are different numbers. And the laminar flame speed, all else being equal, on alcohol is faster than gasoline. So if you are not knock limited, it actually requires less timing on ethanol than it did on gasoline.
So should I be reducing?
So look at what the OEM guys did, because they have a lot of time and money and resources, right?
Yeah.
So look at a pickup truck that's flex fuel and look at their ethanol spark adder table.
Mm-hmm.
You will see at lower loads negative adders in that table. They might take 4, 5, 6 degrees out at part throttle.
I've seen that,
Which is an area that is not
that's why I
documented,
asked.
right? They're not doing that for knock. They're doing that because MBT is actually less timing with the ethanol because the ethanol burns quicker.
So that's why the MBT table is negative.
Well,
The
there's no
alcohol
MB.
Well, they're alcohol adder MBT.
Oh yeah. So an adder to the MBT reference, which is used for torque modeling only, not for
Right.
actual spark delivery, it would be a negative number down.
But I guess I'm trying to look at it as the whole picture, right?
Yep.
So
Now,
I see the negative
when
number.
you get to
I'm like,
high load, the reason we didn't run a bigger number on gasoline was because of that invisible knock limit for whatever fuel quality you have.
Mhm.
And so when you put ethanol in there, all of a sudden the octane jumps from about 91 or 93 pump number to triple digit, right? So now that invisible line moves further out and we are allowed to tread on territory that we could never get to. So if your base engine was, naturally aspirated, let's say we were 26 degrees on gasoline because it was a knock limit, and we switched that same engine to ethanol. On gasoline, it's 26 for a knock limit, but let's say MBT was 30. But when we go to ethanol, MBT is now only 28, but the knock limit is up out of the way.
Right.
I run 28 degrees and I pick up because I'm now running MBT timing without the knock limit. And that's where
So if we had C16 versus ethanol,
you could,
that theory,
you could just advance the time.
the C16 would make. This is where my disconnect's going to be. Is C16 never seems to make the same power.
If
that
you are,
E85, and is it just because of the cooling?
so if you are airflow limited on your engine, because it can only pump a certain amount of air which contains the oxygen into the cylinders,
Mhm.
no matter what non-oxygenated fuel you put in, you only have a certain number of oxygen molecules in the chamber, and those are the only things that can react. So if you pump a fuel in that has oxygen with it also, it's as if you added another throttle body.
Right. And that's where that power's coming from.
Yeah, and because airflow equals power, really what it is available oxygens that can react with hydrogens and carbons to release energy.
Mhm.
That's where the power really comes from, is the energy release, right? So if you get more stuff in the cylinder that can react than normal, so you are super or above the normal charging,
Right.
you chemically supercharge the engine. This is how nitrous works,
Exactly.
right? And oxygenated fuels just do it, but less so. Nitromethane does that also, right?
That's a whole different.
But it carries oxygens, right?
Yeah.
And it promotes this very violent reaction, right? And the reaction is what releases the energy.
It's definitely. So when people say, oh well, if I just throw C16, technically, if it didn't need it, it just makes it slower. What's the relation there?
If you were not knock limited,
Right.
going to a higher octane fuel doesn't necessarily help you.
It doesn't hurt you.
No, it's not helping.
Right. Just a waste.
Because
Of,
you weren't
it just hurts your
knocking it.
wallet.
Yeah. Oh, your wallet get lighter
Yeah.
fast, right?
Yeah.
It's not $5 a gallon.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was like 20 something a gallon.
Yeah, I remember it was only $8 a gallon, right?
Yeah. Only.
Yeah. That's like our cert fuels are crazy expensive though. So like when we go to the lab, $30, $40 a gallon.
Jesus.
So that's just normal.
So your approach to that, let's say so my 2 degrees is negligible, not helping, not hurting, but
You're
not
close.
necessary, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, you can be off by a little bit. Engines want to run. They're very forgiving.
Mm-hmm. I guess, so what I'm getting at is, what happens now once we throw a camshaft in the equation?
Well, so the cam is always a series of trade-offs, right?
Mm-hmm.
It will give you the best pumping efficiency at some frequency
Right.
for a given
Which
run.
what we're basically doing, we're moving that up.
So we move the tuning from low end towards the high,
Mhm.
right?
So what happens to MBT down low?
Well, MBT is always going to move around. Like, so anytime we move the intake valve closing point, we change the relative compression,
Mhm.
and that changes the subsequent combustion event. So yes, I would expect that to move. How much, where, up, down, sideways, I don't know until we
Variable.
test it. And it depends on what you did with the cam. So you could have a big cam, but it could have no overlap, or it could have a ton of overlap,
Mhm.
right? And that matters. So down low, there's a lot of times where we have natural EGR from the overlap because there's not a whole lot of port velocity going on. right? Things wash back and forth very easily. So it's the same as having an EGR valve open. And if EGR were there, EGR is just speed bumps to combustion. It's stuff that already
That can burn again. So.
Yeah, it contributed on the previous cycle. Now it's just in the way, and it's a speed bump to that flame trying to get from the spark plug out to the cylinder wall. So to make up for that, we add more timing because we know it's going to take longer to get from point A to point B. I have to lead it some more. So with big cams, a lot of times we have to put more timing in at idle and off idle areas just to make it normal again.
But would the difference between the pump gas and the ethanol, it would still be the same philosophy, just a different number.
Yeah, it's a different number.
Right, you'd still run less on alcohol, or even the same.
Yeah, you know, all things equal, going from gasoline to alcohol, generally the MBT is a lower number on alcohol.
Okay.
Because it just physically burns faster.
Right.
By a small amount. It's not huge, but it's a number. It's enough of a number that GM has a table for it and puts values in there.
Right.
So how significant? I don't know. You know, there's lots of people who make no changes and their car runs fine. God bless them, that's fine. But the proper answer, and again, GM does this because when they do a flex fuel vehicle, not only does it have to work and run, it has to pass emissions, right? And it's got to have acceptable behavior all the way around, and the combustion has to be clean. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts. They must pass on gasoline, they must pass on ethanol, they must pass on some random blend in between.
So is there any truth to what I've heard before is basically the VVT for the GM engines is simulated EGR?
Well, you can get an EGR effect even with a single variable cam, because even Ford did this on the 46543 valve. If you retard a single variable cam by a bunch at low speed,
20 degrees.
that's a fair amount, right?
That's most of GM, right?
So what happens is the exhaust valve closing event is after TDC. So the piston is drawn down.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the cylinder starts rarefying. It has very low pressure. And if you have something of greater pressure in the exhaust and there's a path from the exhaust, it can literally draw exhaust back into this combustion chamber, the same as it's trying to draw fresh air charge in from the intake runner.
Mm-hmm.
And once it's in there, it's in there. So you get EGR just from cam phasing.
So yeah, so basically it's just pulling the exhaust back down and then starts filling it.
Yeah.
Okay. Because a lot of people are like, oh, well, they have variable timing. Or variable cam timing, just like you have Ford. And I'm like, oh, whoa.
Well,
That
and
is
they've both done a single variable cam application before, right? Ford had the 46543 valves. Godzilla's variable.
But is
The 6.2 Ford was the
But
truck
its
engine.
design isn't for making more power up top.
Well, it does help you because, I mean, oh, by the way, look at how many episodes of Saturday morning TV have you seen where they degree the camshaft?
Yeah.
And we know that generally, as we retard the camshaft, it makes more power up top at the expense of the low end torque.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you could move that in real time, why wouldn't you, right? So yes, there is some magic number for any camshaft and engine combo of new phasing, new center line for everything that breathes better up top than it did down low. Now you could go too far. So on the old 463 valve stuff, the magic number was 9 to 12 degrees. Didn't take a ton. And if you look at like a GM single variable, it's in that ballpark too, right? Even though they
7
could
to
move,
10,
they can move it 30, 40 degrees if they wanted. But the magic number is some, not too much.
Okay.
Right? And that all kind of boils down to the ram tuning effects in the intake runner and the exhaust scavenging. Right? So what balance of that stuff gives you the best overall trade-offs? And really you just find it empirically.
Yeah.
I mean, there's engine software that will simulate it, and it's expensive. So if you go get yourself a copy of GT Suite and use GT Power, you can spend months creating your engine digitally and then simulate it and then come up with what it should be the best, and you'll still have to test it.
And then change the cam and it throws all that off.
Yeah. Well, you could digitally change the camshaft. I mean, that's the cool part about GT Suite is you can simulate all of that. So at PRI last year, Dan did a presentation about using GT Suite to simulate an engine.
Mm-hmm.
And when they very faithfully created the digital twin of the engine in the software, they could move the cam 5 degrees, 10 degrees on duration, overlap, whatever, and get a very good estimate of what the real world change of this would be, because they've taken all those other things into account.
Okay.
But it's a huge time and software investment to get there.
So not to branch off of that too much, I'd like to go back to what made you do the tuning books, because that's obviously not something a lot of people have done. And then, you know, it's helped people like me in the industry. What brought you to wanting to do that, or how did that come? Because you wrote the book on tuning, right?
A couple.
Right?
So, yeah, I got another one coming. If I can finish it. In about 2005, I was at saturation. I walked away from the tuning side of it, and I went back and just got an OEM engineering job. So I joined a Cal team, and my 8 to 5 was just working on an OEM program. But it was, all this stuff was kicking around my head. I had all these aha moments after working with Jerry and then doing my own stuff and like applying that to other software systems. I'm like, oh, now I see how GM's got a mass airflow sensor. Of course they're doing something similar to what Ford was doing because the physics is the same. Why didn't somebody just tell me that? So all these like, why didn't somebody just tell me that? That became Engine Management Advanced Tuning.
Yep.
Right now the publisher picked the title, not me. I wanted to call it like Introduction to Calibration.
Yeah, you talked about that on Monoxide's podcast.
Yeah, they named it. Fine, whatever. But as it turns out, those were valuable lessons, right? You know, time has shown that a bunch of people seem to think that book was helpful. So I'm pleasantly surprised that it, you know, and it's great. I love seeing the light bulb come on over somebody's head. I love helping people. I'll do a one-on-one training session with people occasionally. They reach out like, hey, yeah, we'll schedule a Zoom
I know
session.
shops that have had you fly in and work with.
Yeah, so I fly in, or they can we'll do it an hour or two at a time over Zoom.
Yeah.
And say, hey man, what you got, right? Okay, have you seen, you're familiar with this, this, and this, right? Yep, okay, I saw your videos, okay, cool. We'll pick up from there. What your question is on which program? Go ahead and bring it up on screen, let's look at it. I want you to go to this tab and open this table over here and show me what you got going on there. Did you modify that or not? Or this is why this goes up as that goes up. And we just kind of walk them through, because I don't want to just tell them, oh, just put a 7 in the box and it'll be okay.
Well,
because on some future engine, 7's not going to work.
Well, that's always been my argument with some of the tuning school stuff, not that specific, but tuning schools in general, right? And I understand why it has to be done that way, I guess, is, hey, we found this value, does this. Mm-hmm. Because I'm sure trying to explain why every single thing does this and how to find it is probably not cost effective for them. But when I had first started learning, I learned from a guy that we spent like 3 days going through every one, and he's like, okay, this does this and this is why. This does this and this is why. And I've loved that approach, but obviously that's not a profitable approach.
But it armed you for future projects, right?
Oh yeah, well it just made my curiosity just through the roof now. So, but why do you think that the tuning schools have to do it that way? And because
I'm just used to doing it that way. I nothing against them. I mean,
and this isn't a bash tuning school. I think regardless, you should go to every tuning school you can go to. I mean, even when you guys are speaking of PRI, I go sit down there, because if I pick up a nugget, it was worth it to me.
Yeah. So as long as you believe that the person teaching knows what they're talking about, right? So yes.
Honestly, I listen whether I think they know what they're talking about either way, and then I'll take all of that together and then I'll test it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the ultimate. Like, it's got to pass the smell test when you're done. Like, does this make sense? Do I fundamentally agree with this? Some of my favorite students are guys who've been tuning carburetors for 30 years, right? And then they get into EFI because they know fundamentally what it really needs. Now I just have to say, okay, well, this is
how do I get there?
Yeah. So that's cool, and the fundamentals never leave us. So a guy brings me 1,000 horsepower package of something to tune, like, I'm back to basics. I'm going to really sweat the basics on that thing. What is your injector data? Let's get the math transfer right. Let's get your basic volumetric efficiency estimate right. And then let's see, is the spark reasonable for what you're doing? After that, now we'll start getting into, okay, throttle control and progression, transients and all this other stuff. Okay, cool. But none of that matters if the basics aren't right.
Right.
You know, what fuel pressure?
You got to start with a good foundation.
Yep. What is your fuel pressure? It's supposed to be, here, and it's down here. Well, your injectors are assuming it's here.
Well, that's a thing I think, and it seems simple to me, right? And I'm sure it'll be simple to you. When we get these cars that are, let's say, I'm just going to use the number 14 pounds of boost. I like that number. That's a good starting point. So 14 pounds of boost, right? And you've got 64 pounds at the rail. Do you have 64 pounds of fuel pressure at that injector?
Yeah, so I mean, again, your tuner needs to understand the concept of delta pressure across an injector, right? And that's where you're going.
That's where I'm going.
Right? So the injector does not know that there's 14 psi here and that there's 64 or 100 up here. It knows that this minus this is a certain amount, and for any pressure differential across the orifice, for a certain orifice size, for a certain opening time, a certain amount of stuff is going to make it through the opening. That's it. Right?
Well, that's it, because I'll get situations where, so they have a regulator-based fuel system, right? And they'll put boost in the motor, and then they'll lock the regulator at like 60, and then they put 20 pounds of boost to it, and they're like, man, my 1300s are maxed out. What the hell?
Yeah. So I mean, like a lot of the GM stuff was fixed 4-bar rail pressure.
Right.
And let's assume that it stays at 4-bar, by the way.
We know it doesn't.
Because the more flow you put, there's some head losses in between the pump and the rail, right? So you
and the sensor's back there.
Yeah, if you have a sensor.
Right. Okay. Yeah. There we go.
Right. So your regulation point's back here, but your consumption point's up there, and there's a line that's only this big in between the two, trying to flow how much stuff?
I've always thought that was kind of a thing. It's like
Right.
when they have the pressure sensor, and then they'll like put it behind a fuel filter.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what happened after that filter? And how is that accurate?
Bingo. So you're absolutely on the right path there. And so, yes, I mean, I love one-to-one regulators. The reason why the OEM got away from them was that it dumps the fuel that gets warmed up back into the tank, and it makes more vapor and more vapor pressure,
Right.
which is bad for evaporative emissions. And unfortunately,
But
they have
hotter
to
fuel-
pass that standard.
But hotter fuel also, right, burns faster.
That's okay, it doesn't need help. You're spraying out the
Well, I guess what I'm
At
saying is
light
it would
loaded-
hurt. I would think it would hurt.
No,
because
but
if
at
you
light
feel
load
it-
it doesn't matter because you're spraying the back of a very warm intake valve.
You're thinking OE. I'm thinking like wide open stuff.
I would still rather have it be cool. If I could refrigerate my fuel, I would.
Well, that's what I'm going there. Hold tight. So something I noticed was that after I had run my car, it was making, I think, around 1,500 at the time. After I'd sit at the track a lot, the same timing I was making at the dyno, at the track, I would start having to pull timing because I'm like, man, what's going on? And when somebody had mentioned to me, they're like, hey, how hot's your fuel? Are you running a return system? And I'm like, yeah, of course I got a return system. And I grabbed one of my fuel lines, the feed, and I was like, whoa. And he's like, that's what's happening. On the dyno, you've got fans, you've got it cooling, you're not running it for a long time. So that's what I try to tell people as well, is like, people think, oh, a deadhead fuel system is bad. I'm like, no. It's an on-demand fuel system, which means that the pump's not running at max capacity the whole time. So that's how they vary the fuel.
Yeah. So do you stage your fuel pump speed?
Absolutely.
Right. So if you could do it right, you would have infinitely variable pump feeding the regulator and just dump a small amount of return back
Yes.
all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So like this car has a pair of the tie pumps in the tank, but it runs off of one the vast majority of the time.
Right.
And the second pump only comes on with the boost controller when I get above a certain RPM and above a certain pressure, because that's about the point where I would start to run out of the first pump. And so now when I'm basically full tilt on that pump, I can start ramping in another pump, and I'm only ever bypassing a maximum of one pump's volume.
Right. Well, and then arguably, because some guys are like, oh, I have 3 pumps and I run it all the time and it doesn't matter, it does fine because the regulator handles it. Absolutely, it does. But
Also gets
you're
warm.
heating up that fuel.
Yeah.
And when you heat up that fuel, you make less power.
Yeah. So I mean, think about it the other way, right?
I've seen a guy that ran his fuel through an ice. The guy that told me that runs his fuel through a loop in an ice box in the trunk, and he said that he's picked up over 100 horsepower just by cooling that fuel
So
so
it
much.
cools the air charge coming in, but also it's going to allow you to run another degree or two of timing, maybe more, right? This is kind of the same argument of going from port fuel to direct injection,
Oh, we're gonna go there.
right? So DI, the evaporation happens inside the cylinder, it's like having a second intercooler.
Yeah.
Right? In there, and you're pulling heat out. So yes, the more heat that the fuel could absorb, as long as it does fully evaporate,
Provided that it's
right? So if I refrigerated the stuff, till it was damn near a solid and then injected it, it would probably might struggle to
I was
evaporate.
gonna say that may not be as best, but close.
However, if the fuel could suck another 20 degrees of temperature out of everything, what would we do to make our intercooler that much more effective?
Spray nitrous on it. What do you mean?
Right? But I mean, like if we could make our intercoolers more effective, of course we would do that.
Mhm.
But if the fuel could do that, we could get the same net benefit.
Well, that's a nugget that a lot of people. When I did a podcast with Rick Crawford, and the way he explained everything, it was different. It was quirky, but I liked it. Is he explains everything as opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, I've never thought that way, but I'm definitely thinking that way now. That's why I do these, because I like to learn more.
Mm-hmm.
And his thing is everything's an opportunity.
Yeah.
That's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Running a command pressure off of a sensor and targeting it is opportunity to make more power.
Yeah. And your audience spends more time with things being very warm, and with these giant pumps, you're putting more total heat energy into the fuel. So on an OEM side, we're far more concerned about the everyday driving around town kind of stuff. And then, do we have enough for that corner case of the occasional blast to watt? Right. So they're not going to put more pump on it than they need to, because that's expensive.
Yeah. That's what people are like, why? I don't know why GM doesn't put a bigger fuel system. I'm like, why would they?
Well, you want every car to cost $150,000? Because we can put all kinds of cool stuff on them.
There's no net positive for them.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense to
and it's
overfuel.
actually a problem, right? If you superheat the fuel, and now you are blowing past the seals in the tank, and you have evaporative losses, you fail emissions. There is an evaporative emissions test that they must pass.
Well, that's where the hot fuel tables come in, right?
And if you don't pass that, you don't sell any cars, period.
Yep.
It's just like failing the FTP 75. It's all in the same submission packet to the EPA. All I's must be dotted, all T's must be crossed, and you must be green on everything.
Yeah.
There's no, oh, by the way, or it's only this. Nope. Must pass.
Well, so now we've obviously got into DI.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings a whole new level of complication, because now you've got the torque modeling. Which
What a great new way to screw things up.
I know Ford's had that forever, but I still don't think I care for the torque modeling as much. But I definitely don't feel like it drives better in a sports car than.
Oh, you can drive however you want. That's the cool thing about torque-based control.
Yes,
you have more control now, if everything is right.
Right. But so when you get into the DI stuff, you start running into your limitations.
Yeah, so let's just be clear, right? DI didn't cause that. It has nothing to do with where the fuel is injected. It's just that when GM released the Gen 5 V8s, the V8s went from airflow-based to torque-based throttle control at the same time. It's a coincidence. GM had torque-based throttle control on other platforms
they've already had that
for a long time. I worked on the Chevy Volt. It was very torque-based. I assure you, all hybrids at General Motors are very torque-based, right? And that was in 2007. I started working on that, and they had already been doing torque-based controls for a while before I got.
And they'd had on the turbo cars too, right?
Some of them, yeah. Well, so when they did the Solstice, but they started with a Bosch control system before they adopted their own, and Bosch was torque-based.
I was gonna say, because I remember the Solstice and all that was torque-based.
So when I worked for the other German ECU manufacturer, everything we did was torque-based. So we had BMW, Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, all were using our stuff. It was very torque-based, I can assure you.
Yeah.
And so I did when I was on Harris Other Podcast, we were talking about that Ford DI program. That was very torque-based. It was running on Porsche Cayenne ECU. 100% torque-based, no doubt. So torque-based is not new. It's been around the industry. I'm surprised GM didn't switch to it earlier on the Gen 4 engines. So it came out at the same time as they released the DI, but it's not because of where the fuel is injected that they had to change how they control the throttle. It was just coordinated. It was a good time to make a change. So they bundled several changes in all together at once.
Okay.
So, but torque-based control, once you embrace it, it's actually easier to change your pedal maps. So you can just go in there and make the pedal map more.
It's a little more easier to screw that up.
Oh, of course. Well, if you put a bad number in, it's going to faithfully follow your bad number.
Mm-hmm.
Put an awesome number in there, it will faithfully follow your awesome number. So again, I can take a 4-cylinder naturally aspirated car and make it feel really sporty at 40% pedal because I'm asking for 80% throttle.
Right.
Because I just make it 40% equal to the maximum torque for the engine. And it's going to drive the throttle there to try and get to that estimated torque value. And the only way it gets there is by opening the blade almost all the way. Okay, what goes where you're pointed? It's kind of dumb.
So I guess going back to the DI stuff, you know, once you do the once you have DI, you have essentially supercharging effects for the cooling, super cooling.
Yes, you have in-cylinder cooling event that you didn't have before. So how do we exploit that? If we did nothing else, it would just be cooler. We'd run a degree or two more timing. But the OEMs realized that that cooling effect moved the knock limit out of the way. And the knock limit is one of the things that restricted us from going certain places before. Knock is the reason why we didn't raise compression ratio anymore.
But
So
on the Gen 5.
When they added the cooling effect.
Okay. That's
So
fine, okay.
all of a sudden they put another half point or full point of compression into an engine and not knock, all things being equal. They just run more compression.
And the overall benefit was a more efficient engine.
Yes. So it's more efficient at part throttle and it's more efficient at wide open without getting into knock. Because the knock is suppressed by the in-cylinder cooling from the evaporation of the fuel.
Right.
So, or if you had a turbocharged engine, you would just run more boost than you would normally run because you've got this additional cooling effect at the last moment before combustion, right? Or you raise compression and add supercharging or add boost, right? So even the turbocharged engines went to a higher static compression ratio plus more boost, right? It's this compounding effect. Knowing you're kind of playing the angle on, there's going to be some more cooling even after the intercooler.
So the guys that take the LT engines and they take the DI out and they put the port injection in, that's probably a bad idea, huh?
I don't know why you would do that.
I see it a lot.
I'm
Don't
sure
do
it
that.
works.
That's what we were getting at. Don't do that.
I'm sure it works, but
So
it's not how I would go after it.
let's go this angle. So we briefly touched on it, and I want to touch on it a little more in depth. So let's say I have a car that makes, and this is my standpoint, and again, if I'm wrong, I want to know. If my goal is 900, right, and I can make that 900 DI only, or I can make that 900 with DI and port. Which one's faster? Which one accelerates quicker? Which one makes?
Well,
Because they both make the same power.
to me, it's
What's the difference?
there's more to this equation than absolutely how much peak power I can make on the dyno.
You know, some of us just care about how much power we can make.
I know, but
Over the curve. I'm not talking about peak. I'm talking about
but
over the curve.
even so, the car's got to be drivable because if you make an unenjoyable car, I'm less likely to get in it in the first place to even go enjoy the 900 horsepower. So if it drives like a bag of hammers down low because it can't idle and can't part throttle, we suck all the fun right out of the car.
We're not going aftermarket stuff yet. I'm just talking about. Let's
But
change the
even
number.
a race car's got to make it from the trailer to the pit lanes.
Let's change the number. Stock fueling,
Okay.
750. Stock fueling, stock LT4 stuff, E85, whatever, right? Or that same power with port injection.
If you can get it all done and it all evaporates, you're okay with the DI only. The problem is, like, we get really greedy and then we need more. And there's a limit to how much you can put in the DI window. The DI window is kind of small by comparison, time-wise, right?
And by RPM, it's much smaller.
Well, throughout the cycle, right? So on a port fuel engine, you can be spraying the injector almost continuously through suck, squish, bang, blow, it doesn't matter. It just collects on the back of the intake valve, and then when the valve opens, all the air and the fuel will go in, and then they start mixing, right?
And some people argue that spraying on the back of the exhaust valve
Not
heats the fuel and
not
helps
the
it
exhaust
atomize.
valve, the intake valve,
That's what it meant.
right?
Okay.
So you're cool.
You spray the exhaust valve, you got a bomb. Got it.
Well, unless you're top fuel.
Well,
they have to.
I've seen people speak about puddling fuel at the back of the valve, helping it heat the fuel before it goes in.
It does, yes. And in fact, that's what we do on cold start.
Okay.
That's a normal cold start strategy on PLI. We put it in earlier on purpose and give it some boiling time.
Yep.
So that's perfectly normal. Then once it's warmed up, we don't need that. But at wide open throttle, port velocity approaches infinity, right? The stuff's gonna get slung in there no matter what.
Yep.
Right? And it's gonna get ripped apart and spun and mixed and whatever. port fuel does a pretty good job of mixing. Now, it's not a carburetor, so NASCAR guys are going to jump down my shit for this, but it does a pretty good job of mixing everything. DI, I cannot add fuel all the way through all 4 strokes, right? Because one of them is the stuff is burning. The one after that is the one where we're trying to pump it out the exhaust, right? Then we have the available window through largely the intake stroke. And then we've got the compression, and if I add too late during compression stroke, it may not even get time to evaporate to join the combustion. So although the fuel is there, it may not really participate. So there is some functional limit, some gray area line where I should just stop trying to add fuel because it's not doing any good anymore on DI. So by the time we're all done with it, you got about 1/4 of the window in time that you used to. Out of the 4 strokes, basically one of them works.
And that's why the injectors are so much larger.
Yeah, so the flow rate has to be higher, right? And the only way you get flow rate is, you add pressure, it adds flow rate, but it also, shoving the stuff through a tiny hole at high pressure shears the fluid and makes smaller drops. So that's kind of cool. It makes it easier to evaporate. Okay, cool. However, it also penetrates further into the cylinder, and it could collect on the walls or the top of the piston or whatever, and that's not so cool for combustion. It's not so good for oil retention on the walls. And
just washing it.
There's some downsides. So there's some practical limits, right? Everything in engineering is a trade-off. So if I get to the point where I've done everything that DI injector can do at the working pressure I have in the time window I have, and especially if you try and rev it higher.
Right, because
the time window gets shorter and shorter and shorter the higher we rev it, right? So, at 6,000 RPM, it's 5 milliseconds, right? Because it's 20 milliseconds for the full cycle time. Full cycle time at 7,000 goes down to 17, 14, something. It's, it gets smaller, smaller, smaller the higher we rev it. And yet we need more in there. Okay.
It's kind of
now I got to start making some decisions. Do I make this DI injector flow more and risk the mixture distribution and preparation such that I could be puddling inside the chamber in bad places, or I get a very concentrated stream that doesn't evaporate as cleanly as the original stream? Or do I just add fuel in a different place? And as it turns out, economically, not a bad solution to just go auxiliary port. And I submit to you that the OEMs have seen this too, because if you look at the Ford GT, the Raptors, the LT5, the LT7, a bunch of stuff over in Europe.
Well, there's also other benefits of that little bit of port.
Oh, by the way, you're cleaning the intake valve.
Exactly. So.
Yep. And your overall mixture distribution ends up being kind of good too, because if I put all the fuel in a concentrated shot from the DI injector, I end up with a slug of fuel surrounded by a cloud of air. When it gets added at the port, it's far more homogeneous. So that stuff's already kind of pre-mixed before it gets into the cylinder to mix with the other fuel.
So
it's not a bad deal.
If it's only adding at wide open, does that negate any wall wetting or
so
transient fueling deal?
It becomes less of a challenge. Yeah, right.
You don't have transient for Gen 5 because why would you have that?
Yeah, you wouldn't cover it in that end of it. You would have to have a PFI transient section. So if you look at LT5, it's got both. Right? It's in the control logic that way. However, if they're only using the port at watt,
it's never.
All the transients, as flow goes up, the amount of transient approaches zero.
Right.
So if you're only adding it way down at the far end of the curve where it's approaching zero, you can be off by a few percent. You're cool. You're good.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of forgiving. Again, engines want to run.
Yeah. They're gonna figure out a way either way.
Yeah. So it's not bad. If I had to build one for myself, I would have 16 injectors on it.
Right.
I would leave this stock DI system alone, and wherever that runs out, that's where it's time to add another device. And there are multiple systems out there. What a time to be alive. Multiple people make multiple things and do this job. Some of them do it automatically. Some need to be carefully calibrated to get it to do the right thing. But the thing of adding more total fuel to support the power that you want to make and the airflow that you're shoving through there gets done.
Still achieving the same goal.
Yeah. So I mean, I love Like Dave Stack's system is phenomenal. It's more complicated than it needs to be. Like he did full sequential.
Mhm.
I kind of laugh at that Dave Weiss sequential. You're not, 6,000 RPM wide open throttle, really. You're not idling on the port injectors.
Right.
Like sequential matters a lot at idle and low RPM. Once your port velocity is sky high, you're just, it's a hurricane in there. Like, dude, the timing when it starts, when it ends, kind of doesn't matter anymore. And you've got, oh, by the way, that's only maybe half of your fuel because the other half's coming from the DI injectors. So it's cool. But, I've done it before, like even before his stuff existed. I did a project years ago where we had a mega squirt or a micro squirt controlling 8 batch fired injectors on top of a DI system. And it worked.
Yeah.
And we made like 1,000 horsepower out of the engine. Like, it was a 2.9 Whipple at the time on a 7.5 liter engine with a snotty cam. With, 14 pounds of boost, whatever.
You always start at 14. You always start there. Because you
So,
always
I
want to
mean-
double the power.
Yeah, so it was, it was pretty healthy, but it was certainly not going to get it done on stock LT1 injectors.
Yeah.
But with 8 more modestly sized injectors, you can get pretty far. Because you got about 600 horsepower worth of DI injector, and a set of LS3 injectors would get you another 600. That's well into 4-digit territory. These guys had even bigger injectors on there. Our duty cycles were really small. Like, you would be better with a smaller injector. And they can't, that breaks their mind.
Dealing with, like I watch a lot of Shane Teckenberg stuff.
Yeah, he's way out there, right?
I love it though.
He's the edge of the envelope.
Well,
which is
because
neat.
he makes you think, right?
Yeah, he's sharp though. I mean,
So
don't
I
know what
watch
he
a
does.
lot of his stuff on his injection window with just port injectors, because that's something that a lot of tuners don't mess with. And if you're changing the cam, it definitely changes where that. So you get the guys that have the cars that want to surge and stuff like that. You can fix a lot of that with the injection timing.
Every car I do that gets a significantly bigger cam than stock, I'm going to shift the EOI targeting on a port fuel system by some amount. Now, how much does it need? Again, you got to get kind of in the ballpark. You'll be off by a little bit and still pretty good. But let's say the cam is 20 degrees bigger than the original cam. I don't know, maybe we try moving the EOI by 20 degrees. There's guys who are making these spreadsheets about theoretically.
I've seen the spreadsheets. Spreadsheets.
And you do all of that, and then you still got to empirically tune it in the car.
Well, and he's even said, he's like, there's no one size fits all deal.
Bingo.
The other thing is you do kind of need an absorbent amount of injector if you're going to try to make more power by moving, because
Oh, at what?
we're talking. Well, drivability is for sure. If you got pretty decent sized cam, and you're not messing with that on a big cam car, you're going to get some surges. Some
Oh,
bumps,
absolutely, yeah. I mean, because we, by definition, like this car, needs bigger injectors. It's flex fuel, right?
Yeah.
It's 800 wheel, so I've got a set of 1050s on here, right?
Yeah.
And so the pulse width for idle kind of small.
Well, that was
And so when that's timed, start to have more profound effect at idle. Now, at wide open throttle, when you get over 50% duty cycle, the question is not when is the injector open, it's when is it not open, right?
Right.
As pulse width gets large and port velocity approaches infinity, the timing, and even batch versus sequential, kind of doesn't matter anymore, right? So there's some area where it transitions that I just don't care anymore. But kind of, the below 2,000 RPM in traffic kind of thing, absolutely, you could improve. And the proof would be you get incomplete combustion.
Yeah.
And so in one of my videos, I showed
you can move it and it changes your fuel trims.
Yeah, or I locked it in open loop in one of my training videos that I did. So if you go to cartrainingonline.com, you'll see all the Calibrate Success videos there. Under the GM section, there's one on bigger cams. And we did an experiment where we locked the car in open loop, and we did not adjust the VE surface. It was a LS1 Camaro with a big cam. But what we did is we took measurements at the same speed and load at different EOIs. And we saw what the resulting lambda was as measured with my good lambda meter. And pulse width was identical, map and airflow were identical, but somehow I got a different reading on air fuel meter. Because the meter is an oxygen sensor, and it reads free unburned oxygen. And so if you react everything off, you're going to get a different reading on the lambda sensor. It's going to look richer. when you get more complete combustion for the same amount of stuff. And so we did that experiment, and sure enough, it went from showing lambda 1 to 97 to 94. And the pulse width was the same. Like, did I really richen this engine, or did I just start actually burning the fuel I was put in? So the answer was, I want to take that point where it's showing 94, because now that's complete combustion. Now I need to go back and redo my airflow model, right? Because my airflow model was based on a bad assumption of complete combustion before. I was actually putting too much fuel in it, about 6% too much, right? So I had to go lean things out by about another 6%. But once I did that, now fuel economy is better, throttle's more crisp.
To say throttle response is a big thing that you'll notice.
And I'm not putting unburned fuel through the engine for no good reason. The stuff I'm putting in actually participates in parties and pushes on the piston, and we move forward.
Yeah. So just something, well, I guess what I watched on his was that at wide open, he was showing that if you have a big enough injector to where you can actually decide where you could pick up quite a bit of power, you know, and he says not in every case, but in a lot of cases.
Yeah, so if he's playing, if let's say the injector of wide open throttle is at 60-70% duty cycle, and he wants all that to be at a certain time.
Yeah, I think he said the limit was around 60.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'm shooting from the hip, and he's got data. So,
yeah.
But it doesn't surprise me, right? But if you go up to 80% duty cycle, it probably doesn't matter anymore, right?
Right.
If you were
Some
at the
people care
extreme
about those
range,
little horsepowers.
but if you were extreme range, let's say your injector for some reason was only 40% duty cycle at watt. Now,
That's gonna matter.
first problem is I think that's way too big of an injector for the application, but the effect would be very pronounced because you would have a slug of fuel. And so do you want that slug early, late? How do we get all that fuel to mix and evaporate and turn into something that evenly burns?
Right.
Now, the easiest way, in my mind, is spread it out, make the pulse width longer. So you have a lower flow rate, but a longer duration of injection, and now it's just continuous stream.
Okay. So not to shift focus too much, but when you're saying about the catalyst, right? If you have too much fuel in the catalyst, it makes it hotter.
Not necessarily.
Okay, because do you
So-
know where I'm going with this?
No, but
Cat over temp.
So yeah, cat over temp's a real thing, and you have to remember the heat in the catalyst comes from a reaction. We're reacting. We're basically taking unburned fuel and unburned air and reacting them. Cats are hot enough that they're beyond the ignition point of gasoline, right? We can at least agree on that part. Okay, so if we had air and fuel in the presence of that much temperature, it's going to light off. And hopefully the unburned things mix with the other unburned things and turn into CO2 and water, and we just have nice clean vapor and clouds coming with the tailpipe. And, now we have world peace. So the catalyst, the more stuff we react, the more heat we generate. And, oh, by the way, the hotter the stuff coming into the catalyst, the hotter the catalyst is going to be too. So what a shocker, exhaust gets warm as we go to wide open throttle. And it is possible that even at normal wide open throttle, it's beyond the temperature that the catalyst wants to be at. So we got to find a way to, number one, stop reacting, and number two, actively cool it. So this stop reacting means I have to not have available fuel bits and available oxygen bits at the same time in the catalyst. So power enrichment usually takes care of that, because as soon as you go off of stoich, the oxygens go away. And now you have fuel bits, but no oxygens.
So it doesn't react.
So now temperature coming into the cat is temperature of the cat equals temperature going out of the cat. Because there's no exotherm, there's no combustion happening because there's no unburned oxygens. They all burned up in the engine. So that's cool. Now the catalyst is at least just kind of at the stream temperature of whatever the exhaust is coming in. But that still might be too hot for the catalyst. So how do I bring the whole bulk temperature down? You have to start looking at what's bulk burn temperature going to move with. Couple things. One is air-fuel ratio, and the other is ignition timing relative. So if I were, let's take an extreme example on the second one. We've all seen, like, we have camshaft wrong, or we have the distributor wrong, and we're too retarded on our timing at idle.
It's blowing close the headers.
Headers turn orange. Pretty hot, right? So retarded timing means that the combustion doesn't happen in the water-cooled engine. it's still happening on the way out the pipe. And it's releasing that energy to that stuff instead of the water jet of the engine. It's a good way to make the exhaust hot, right? It's so effective it'll do it even at idle. Now imagine doing that 6,000 RPM, wide open throttle.
So would that be part of the argument where, you know, a lot of people are like, oh, low timing and rich is the way to go, but my argument is at a certain point, low timing is more
Bad.
dangerous.
So the conservative, safe tune that
Oh,
somebody
I hate
says
those
they
words.
gave you,
God, I hate those words.
right? That might be the cause for an exhaust failure, including a catalyst.
Yeah.
Because if you could have run 20 degrees, but you gave them 12 degrees.
Right. At a point, it's not efficient anymore.
Yeah, and yes, it's not knocking, but everything in the exhaust. I mean, like the exhaust valve,
All the way to the muffler.
the flange, the header, right?
Mhm.
The catalyst, if it's there, the O2 sensor, all these things that don't want to be hot get very hot. And then all the heat shielding and everything on their car.
An easier way to picture it is, how do you get a turbo to light off?
Mm-hmm.
Fat and retarded.
Yeah. So the retarded leaves the energy in the exhaust.
And then the fuel burns.
So now a turbine harnesses that energy,
Yep.
right? It's a power plant. Right? So it's
It's a secondary combustion chamber, really.
It's not even just the combustion. It's harnessing enthalpy. It's a fancy way to say energy, right? And so there's a change in enthalpy across the blade, and the output difference is shaft work.
Yep.
And that shaft is attached to a compressor. So retarded timing relative to where you could have run leaves energy in the exhaust. And heat is where energy goes to die.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if I retard the timing too much, my exhaust temps are sky high. So I'm going to try and keep advancing the timing until I run into that invisible knock limit. But I want to ride that if I can, because it gives me the lowest exhaust temps on the way out. So the OEM does that.
Well, they do.
And they're pretty good. They got even better about it recently. Like modern knock systems are awesome, right?
Well, the GM catalyst temp is calculated, but I've also noticed that obviously with more gram per cylinder, but with more ignition time, we'll actually alter that number as well.
100%. So in a previous life, I was a Cat 10 model guy.
You modeled cats?
Yeah.
Okay. Cat walls?
So, yes, the major inputs are speed and load, air-fuel ratio, and timing.
Yeah. It seems like it doesn't affect it a lot, but it definitely.
Oh no, it does affect it a lot. It's a big number.
Okay.
Again, like if you retard the timing, the headers turn orange.
Right.
That same effect is there at 6,000 RPM, I assure you. So.
Oh yeah.
You know, and so.
Well, if you ever watch turbo engines on a dyno.
Yeah, the whole thing glows.
Everything glows.
Like they shut off the lights and everything.
Wait, I can see through that pipe.
Yeah. So that's a big part of it, right? So anything I can do that lets me sneak another degree or two of timing in brings the EGTs down.
Right. But doesn't necessarily make anything more dangerous as long as you're
not knocking.
right.
I just don't. The knock hurts the pistons. The temperature hurts the exhaust.
Well, the same argument can be had with the fuel though, because too rich is also an issue.
So
One thing
we automatically we could run Stoic at Watt. They're like the BMW turbo engines.
I was going to ask you that. Well, and they only run it until the cat temp hits a certain number.
Or the turbine inlet temp.
Okay.
So until they have a thermal reason to come off of it, because they make enough torque at Stoic. Now, on gasoline and ethanol, some amount of enrichment from Stoic releases more energy. But at some point you go over the curve, and as you add even more fuel beyond that, the extra fuel doesn't necessarily completely react, and it absorbs heat from the combustion event, and it becomes the control rods in the reactor. So as I get progressively richer, the power goes away a little bit, but not as fast as you would think. But EGTs start dropping. So adding fuel enrichment is a very powerful lever to control exhaust temps. And the OEMs do this. Now, there is a secondary benefit. As I go really, really rich, combustion slows down. I now add timing to make up for that.
Yep.
So there is a spark adder versus lambda or EQ ratio table.
And in the
then
newer
if you
stuff,
notice is you
it's
get
even
down,
better.
if you get down into the area where you would be commanded for cat protection,
It has more timing.
there might be 4 degrees more timing in there.
They're specifically 4 degrees. That's weird. I was like, wait a second. They're at 1.3 something, 1.4. That's specifically 4 degrees.
So they know that the extra richness pushes the knock limit also. And so now they can put another couple degrees of timing, and more of that stuff burns in the cylinder versus down the pipe on the way towards the catalyst.
Yeah.
And it reduces EGTs twofold.
So we use cat over temp for a different reason, but it does result in more power.
Yeah, so, well, again, like the first 10% of enrichment gets you most of your torquing improvement over stoke, right?
Right.
So you go from EQ1 to EQ 1.1, right? Go land at 0.9, 0.88, whatever. And it's pretty good. Now, you might get slightly better by going a few percent richer yet again, but the more fuel I keep adding beyond that, it just starts controlling EGTs, but you can also add time. So you got to kind of do both together. I remember when the 03 Cobras came out. Terminator, game changer, right? Oh yeah, 400 horsepower.
Arguably the best looking Mustang ever made, but
but again, instantly all the armchair experts on the internet were like, oh, this thing runs pig rich. No, it runs appropriate. Because they had to keep a
It does what it
catalyst
has to
alive
do to
behind a
stay alive.
supercharged engine. Right? The only other previous supercharged engines were the Lightning was kind of a pathetic attempt ahead of it, and then the GM 3800s. Right? This is the first really serious effort supercharged V8 that we saw in the industry that on a performance side here. And everyone's like, oh, they run pig rich, but you know what? They live. And if you look at, they were running that rich, but they'd run like 23 degrees of timing, where an equivalent engine might struggle to run 17, 18.
so that was something I noticed on like the Blackwings, because the Blackwings run an absorbent amount of timing, but they're wideband controlled, and they have so many modifiers that are adding fuel and adding fuel and adding fuel. So I've seen upwards of 26 to 28 degrees on a factory supercharged Blackwing.
Yeah, so the absolute number means nothing in a vacuum. Runs 28 degrees. At what speed, what load, what inlet
at
temp,
what with boost, but
at what enrichment, right?
right. But
So
that's what I'm getting at.
All of these adders, you can't just look at 28 degrees and just put 28 in the high octane table and call it good.
Right.
Zero everything else out.
Oh, well,
Because,
some people do. Why not?
well, you know what, my car runs.
Um,
So there's a reason why there's layers to the onion, right? And so they put these extra layers, and all the layers summed up to 28 in that particular case. However, you might find that if the exhaust wasn't hot, it would only be running a lower,
122 usually.
yeah, but yet it still delivers on the promise of horsepower.
I was gonna say it still seems to make similar horsepower though.
Yes.
So
Yeah, because as you're adding the fuel, you're slowing down the burn. You would be losing power, but you're getting it back by adding the timing back in.
So do you think the BMW guys do the whole not bringing the power enrichment in until a certain temperature?
Well, it's not power enrichment for them. It's thermal enrichment.
Yeah.
So their engine passes the SCA rated power test at Stoic. They could make more.
I've seen Mercedes does that.
Yeah, it's a European thing. So
Yeah, they're like, well,
it's
but
beyond
I've seen
people.
like
We
30
did
pounds
that.
of boost at 14.1 air fuel.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
As long as it's not knocking and it's not over temp, what's the problem? We could make more, yes, you're right. But they only need to make what they promised. They didn't overpromise. So if they say we can make 400 and they make 400 at Stoic, why enrich? All it does is use more fuel. So your fuel economy numbers go in the toilet.
Yeah.
And you worry about sooting things up or whatever. But if you're not cooking the inlet to the turbo, you're not cooking the catalyst, and it's not knocking, and you make enough power. Now, for us in the aftermarket, there's no such thing.
that's not.
However, it delivers on their promise to their customer. If they say 400 and they make 400, they don't need to make 405. They don't need to make 450.
Well, I've seen in the aftermarket though, I've seen they tend to follow that still. Like I've seen logs of some of the Supras at the track leaving on 30 pounds of boost, and they're all the way through first gear before it even has the fuel.
Well, things happen really fast in first gear too. So
Yeah.
you're less likely to hurt it in first gear than you are in fourth gear, right? So it's not bad.
It's just all relative, I guess is what I was trying to put that.
And keep in mind, like, they have a turbo in between their engine and their catalyst, so there's a massive temp drop across the turbine.
Right.
Right? So you could lose 300 degrees from the inlet to the outlet of the turbine. Therefore, the catalyst is never really all that hot. But they're controlling the turbine inlet temp to usually about 950 C or 1050 C if they got really exotic materials.
Okay.
Right? That's, like, I think ZR1's probably got the good material. It's probably got MRN wheels on it. It's probably a 1050 wheel, if not more. But
Yeah, I mean, because
that-
they're doing that on 91, aren't they?
yeah.
Yeah, which is unbelievable. But
Yeah, and then
they're
throw
just,
an electric motor in the front too to help it.
they're just likely doing that though with lower timing and just making everything more efficient and
Well, their static compression ratio is a little lower. They took a lot of compression out relative to.
they took a lot of it, didn't they?
Yeah. I wrote that article about that, and we're kind of talking like if we just kind of did the math and like, okay, but you lose a lot when you take the compression ratio away. But they make 20 pounds of boost. Yeah.
That seems to
24
be
at altitude.
GM's number, huh? For turbo stuff, they love 20 pounds. You thought mine was crazy at 14. They love 20.
Yeah, no, I love that they did it. Right? Kudos to the guys who stood up in the meeting and said it with a straight face to management.
Yeah.
Because, guys, we did it. They bought it. Right? That car would have been a home run at 800 horsepower. It made 800 on the gate pressure.
I don't think it would have been a home run though, because you can't compare it to the industry. There's no way.
Well, that car still with 800 horsepower is not going to be slow.
Right, but
And then they could have come back with a version B, C, D later, right? Oh, by the way, I've heard off the record. It's absolutely capable of more, right? I mean, think of what a pair of 76s can do.
I've heard from someone, and I won't say who or what, but that they've made right under the 2000 range with factory components.
Okay, I didn't hear him go that far. I heard that
This was engine
on
down.
accident they had some issues in early development where they were
Booster
probably
issues.
making 1200 and didn't realize it because the model was off.
Yeah, I don't
And
know.
they went back and looked at it like, ooh, it was a little spicy.
I was just told because I had questioned some of the components. I'm like, hey, a flat plane crank typically doesn't like boost or a lot of load. The flat plane is weaker than a cross plane crank. And he kind of just murmured. He's like, oh, it makes almost 2,000. I'm like, I'm sorry, what?
Well, I mean, let's rephrase this, right? Go back to LS1. Stock 5.7 LS1 released at a whopping 315 horsepower, 340 in a good example.
Yeah,
We'd made 1,000 on those cranks before.
cross plane.
But whatever, the crank was designed for X. We made more than X times 2.
Right.
As long as you don't knock, you don't spin it too fast.
Well, arguably, it's more RPM because they're spinning an 8,500 stock crank
Yes.
and put 40 pounds of boost to them.
God
Yeah.
bless America.
They
What
do
a
it.
time to be alive.
The crazy thing is like, so we're putting together a Mustang with I'm going to do a 5.3 LC9 because, the Tahoe needed a half-inch cylinder liner.
Mm-hmm.
They made it, so we're going to use it, but there's guys out there, and I've talked to several that are like, yeah, dude, we hit them with 35 to 40 pounds of boost, and it's like, they live for ever. So, I don't remember exactly where we left off, but something that I see and that one of those things that I don't understand but I see it. So when we go to direct injected cars and say we have our injection window and everything is doing what it's supposed to, when we start making more power with like 93, we start getting soot.
Yeah,
What is it?
totally
Why is it?
expected.
And
right?
why does it go away on the 85?
Okay, so multiple things in play here. Let's stick with the gasoline argument first.
Right.
More power means more airflow, which means more fuel. The DI window, as we discussed before, is kind of narrow. All that fuel has to get in that narrow window. So the more fuel in that same small space, the more concentrated that fuel stream is, and the harder it is for it to evaporate and mix. And little bits of fuel that don't evaporate completely, that have combustion come past them, the shell evaporates and the shell burns and the inner part becomes this crunchy little kernel that is that little soot particle. And you get enough of those and you can see it out the tailpipe. So it's unburned fuel,
Okay.
is what it is. So the more fuel you put in, not 100% of what you put in is going to evaporate and participate, unfortunately. It's one of the downsides of that setup. We can't guarantee evaporation, we can't guarantee mixing, we can't guarantee combustion. We put a lot more in until we get enough. And if 90% of what we put in burns, well, that's still 10% that didn't. And so we put 10% more in, which is really only 9% more, right? And eventually we just added and added and added to the amount of stuff that doesn't completely participate.
Okay. So, but this is mostly, like I said, based on like a 93 fuel. And obviously we just kind of, at a certain power level, we kind of just have to deal with it because we need that fuel for cooling and to keep us in our knock range.
Yeah, and so different fuels will have different properties, right? So does the ethanol evaporate and mix differently than the gasoline, right? Or did you add it from different sources? Because, by the way, you had to find a way to get 30% more of it in with ethanol.
Yeah.
So if you were doing ethanol by adding more from port versus all of it on gasoline from the DI only, well, it doesn't shock me that the DI only has some sort of formation where a split system doesn't.
But sometimes, the most times I usually see this is around 900 when we're running additional meth injection as our extra fuel. If we're doing it on meth and 93, so we're still following our window, we're sooting pretty heavy up top.
Yeah, and keep in mind that the meth is fuel, and it is doing some cooling on the way in. So your injection point for the meth is well upstream of the intake valve, right?
Quite a bit.
So it has sapped some temperature out of the incoming air charge, all things being equal. And the temperature is part of what was helping that gasoline evaporate and mix.
Okay.
And you took some of that away. So now the quality of evaporation has changed. Now, is it bad enough to be a problem yet? I don't know. Gray area. Gonna have to measure.
Yeah. So I guess if you had cats, would that be partially what's, I guess, okay, so what I'm transitioning to is the green cats and things like that. What is the difference between that and a standard cat, and why can those tolerate more power while still doing an effective job?
Okay, so any catalyst has a certain cross-sectional area for stuff to flow through, and has a certain amount of that area occupied by the grid. And so any grid of any length is going to have some back pressure that scales with flow. The more stuff we try and shove through the same grid, the more resistance we build. Right? So at idle, there's no back pressure. Right? Cats are almost invisible to the engine flow-wise at idle, but at 6,000 RPM, wide open throttle, it becomes a very measurable number. So if we can open up more cross-sectional area, even with the same grid density, we would have more places for that flow to pick and go. Therefore, it wouldn't build up as much resistance.
Okay.
So a physically larger cross-section absolutely helps, all things being equal. The other thing we could do is change the fingerprint of the grid, how much that grid resists the flow. So that is measured in a couple ways. Number one, how thick is each bar of the grid? So is it a thicker ceramic substrate, or is it a thinner metallic substrate? Right, so you see where I'm going with this? So a metallic substrate can be thinner for the same cells, but for each cell, the wall is thinner, leaving more area in the middle to flow. So things like the Jezzy cats, which I run on this car, at like 800 wheel, have metallic substrates and they're thinner cross sections. So more of that area, even though there's a grid, more of the area in between the walls of the grid is available for stuff to flow through. It still has relatively the same surface area, it's just that the middle of it is thinner.
Okay.
So that helps. The other becomes, what is the grid density? How many cells per inch? So a modern Lev 3, Lev 4 car might have, a primary cat might be 600 or even 900 cells per square inch. Pretty significant grid density there. 400 was really common for a long time. It's just that as we go to tighter and tighter emission standards, we got to have more opportunity for the catalyst to be in contact with the things that didn't react. So they do that through grid density many times. So the green cats are about 400 cells per square inch. So they're very similar in absolute grid density to what we had on a lot of Lev 2 and early Lev 3 cars. So it absolutely can do a lot of cleanup work. But when we talk about like the super clean stuff, the ULEV, the SULEV currently, yeah, kind of the only way to get there is like really heavy grid density. And then the last thing is like how much precious metal loading is on that grid. So how much platinum, palladium, and rhodium. And that stuff's expensive. The OEM wants to put enough on there to get the job done all the way through the life of the car, but no more, because it's expensive.
Right.
Now, in the aftermarket, if they have to make something pass and it needs $50 more of precious metal on it, just gets $50 more of precious metal. And as long as it passes and meets the standard, gets the magic sticker from the EPA or whatever, then way to go. So these Jezzy Cats I have on here are the higher loaded ones. They have a lightly loaded one. So if you order them from Cook's today, they've got the lighter loaded ones. So it's the same grid, 400 cells per inch, thin walls. They do have a significant amount of precious metal on them, but it's less precious metal than this particular cat has on it. And that's just like a very super thin layer deposited on the actual grid. So it doesn't change the flow rate or the back pressure. It just changes the conversion rate of bad stuff to good stuff.
Well, so what I've seen, like the standard OE cat, they're typically made of like a ceramic or something like that, which if they fail, they tend to break apart and they'll go out.
Yeah. Well, everything melts at some temperature, right?
Right. Well, and so I told you a situation before where the back of the cat cylinder is tapered and it would push that cat into that taper, which would close it off.
Yeah, once you fail the structure, everything else is just eventual unhappiness, right?
So where I'm going with this is that has always scared me and made me so scared to run cats. But as we've discussed, and we need to try to be better, right? We need to try to make sure we are hitting our emission targets. We need to run cats if we can run cats. Plus, we like a car that doesn't stink when you go to dinner.
Yeah, this one's awesome for that. Now, I'm not up at the power level you're used to playing at, right? You're up in the 4-digit.
But do you think that's a possibility? And if we're failing those cats, is it our fault?
Yeah, it's your fault as a tuner. It's your fault. Now, you might not understand why because you didn't collect enough data to understand it. The first thing, I mean, really, if you're worried about it, put a thermocouple in the middle of the catalyst. How often do you see that in the aftermarket?
No. Yeah.
So, when I do an emissions program, like one of my clients, I just did a program where it was a turbocharged Miata. And we had to pass emissions. But my test car was fully instrumented, pressure, temperature, everywhere along the exhaust pad. And it was all set up into this other outboard data logger where I could see everything. So I could see the profile, the warm-up profile of the middle of the brick, how long between when I start the car, between then and when the middle of the brick gets to the good conversion temperature.
Right.
And that makes a huge difference. So I use that. But then also when I was doing wide open throttle testing, I'm looking at that same thermocouple and I say, well, how hot does it get? Now I was also checking the temperature going into the turbine, as it turns out that's the one that gets warm first, because once we go through a turbine, we have a big drop in temperature, and if we stay loaded rich, it's not going to exotherm the cat and get hot from there. So the cat's usually not the limiting factor of watt on a turbo car, but on a supercharged car, there's no turbo in the way. So what comes out of the engine goes right into the brick. And again, if we measure that brick temperature, sometimes we're surprised by what we see. And now you go, oh, geez, maybe those OEM guys weren't so crazy with the numbers they put in for cat overtemp protection.
So that's what I'm getting at. Should we be running these cars richer if we're running catalyst? Is that our fix?
Yeah, so it's part of the fix, yes. So richer with more spark.
It's more timing.
Not your safe tune with, it was rich and I had safe timing. Safe timing is sometimes safe for knock at the piston, but the opposite of safe for your exhaust system in catalyst. So appropriate timing is what I would say.
Yeah. The word conservative tune is just, as soon as I hear, oh, he left it on conservative tune, I was like, so basically he wasn't comfortable with what he was giving you, So he put something in there that is,
Yeah.
he thinks is safer.
One word of caution. So we go wide open throttle. We're fully enriched. Right? Every site on the catalyst has basically fuel on it, but no oxygen, and it's really hot. What happens when we lift the throttle?
Pull time back, it ignites.
And what else do we do when we go to zero throttle at 6,000 RPM?
Cuts the fuel.
And what goes through the exhaust system?
Oh, still air. Yeah.
And that oxygen,
The whore molecule.
yeah, she finds dancing partners in the catalyst. And there are plenty of fuel molecules attached to the
They're
catalyst
still hanging there waiting.
that are really hot and really bothered. And they're waiting for some hot chick to come by so they can get some, right? And guess who strolls along by? Her oxygen comes by, struck her stuff, and there's a reaction.
So
And that is the Bessemer process. It's how we melt steel in a steel mill, right? We get it really hot and we pump oxygen into the furnace to supercharge the furnace, right? And all of a sudden the temperatures where they were nice and steady at about 900 centigrade, all of a sudden spike to 1100 because you gave it the oxygen it needed to start releasing energy there. So the factory, part of their cat over temp protection strategy is they inhibit the decel fuel shutoff for a few seconds.
yeah, there's that delay.
Until the temperatures can come back out of the stratosphere. So maybe it's not a bad idea.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot
Right?
of sense.
And that's how the OEM, like GM does not have a rash of warranties on the LT4 cars. Somehow they make 650 horsepower all day long and twice on Sunday, but yet their catalysts live. Their catalysts live 150,000 miles under warranty, or else they have to buy you a new one for free.
Yeah.
As long as you didn't monkey with it, right? So GM knows how to make that live, and I can guarantee you that on the ZR1, they're going to be doing the same kind of thing at 1,000 horsepower, right? But catalysts require a certain amount of care and feeding, right? So yes, they are going to put some extra fuel in to keep things cool, and they're going to control the exotherms in the catalyst by not undersparking it, not throwing a bunch of raw oxygen at hot things that are loaded with fuel. Right? And if they do those things, then the catalyst lives a nice, long, happy life. GM's not the first twin-turbo mid-engine vehicle out there on the planet, right? They did not invent this stuff.
Yeah.
So there's plenty of case studies, and really whether the engine's at the front, back, middle, whatever, kind of doesn't matter. Right? The same rules apply. The catalyst doesn't know it's in a GM or a Porsche.
Right. Well, that covers a lot of what I really wanted to know, because in my mind, like I said, you know, I get people that are like, oh, stupid GM, I can't believe they did this. And I'm like, hold. I said, these guys spent millions of dollars to do this. They're not going to spend $1 where they don't need to do it. So I naturally just want to know, you know, if we're going to be turning something off, why are we doing it? And what it's going to affect and things like that. And
Here's
then you have that insight.
a great data point for you. Look, again, we're across the aisle at our Ford friends. Ford Racing sells a kit made by Whipple.
Yeah.
And if you put that Whipple 3-liter on a Gen 3 or Gen 4 Coyote, you can make 700-800 horsepower through the factory cats all day long, and it will not melt them. And that's the factory catalyst. Not an upgrade to the exhaust manifold, the flange size, and the brick, and all this stuff. There's certainly room for improvement in it. So to blanketly say cats won't live with a supercharger or at high power is absolutely laughable to me.
Right. Well, and I think a lot of it, like I said, it's on our end.
Well, because that cal that was done for Whipple was done by an OEM Calibrator. I know the guy. And he does a good job. He knows what he's doing. He's seen the Ford logic before, and he's using the Ford logic entirely appropriately. So, therefore, he's done the things he needs to do at wide open throttle to keep the catalyst alive. Could it make another 40 horsepower? Yeah, probably. I mean, yeah, if he was doing long tubes and off-road X-Pipe and whatever, but it's so environmentally irresponsible, right? And they've got an EO number, right? Since it gets a Ford racing part number, Ford is never going to put their name on anything that does not pass emissions. So it is certainly possible, right? It's hilarious that they have an 800 horsepower option that you can walk in and buy for a Coyote in either a Mustang or an F-150 or whatever that still passes emissions.
It's getting wild out here.
Yeah.
That's one thing I forgot to touch on. I just want to touch on it real quick. So go back to LT4. You're running on DI. You're running a leaner fuel mixture because it's more efficient.
Am I?
I don't know. That's what I'm asking. So typically you'll see they'll target 12.5.
Well, first of all, going from gasoline to ethanol.
Let's just do gasoline.
Oh, yeah, but like we wouldn't use caveman units for the ratio. We would use lambda or EQ ratio.
You forget that we're speaking to people that don't deal with this enough.
Oh man, join my fraternity, man. Hey, lambda.
I know.
Right? There's not even any hazing. We occasionally drink together. It's fun.
I gotta try to keep it everybody friendly so everybody can learn. But
you guys learn the hardest possible unit. You trained yourself over years and years to look for 14.7, and 14.7 is a lot. It's not even the real number anymore. Now the number is 14.1.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's 10% ethanol everywhere anyway. You can't buy the 14.7 fuel anymore. So half these wide bands out there are reporting the wrong number to begin with. So right away they got 4% error baked into everything
they all
do.
run Lambda 1 anyways.
Well, Lambda, the sensor doesn't know or care that you have
Right, it just
gasoline,
knows that
E10,
this is still-
E85, methanol, or coal. The sensor doesn't care, it knows oxygen balance.
Yeah. But I guess where I'm going with this is why would the aftermarket choose to run the 12, well, we want to do 85. Why would they choose to run that instead of 80 or 78? Why did they do that on the port injected and the direct injected? They're leaner.
So one of the things we run into is we can't get all that fuel mass in the time window. So when the time window is limited and trying to put too much fuel in creates soot, just don't do that. Or asking for too much fuel flow through a DI high pressure pump that can only move so many cc's per cam lobe squirt, and after that the rail pressure is tanking. But if we took 10% of the fuel load out, we would be able to maintain pressure. We would do better with less fuel at higher pressure and be happier as long as it's not knocking.
But in theory, wouldn't they just run 12.5 on a port injected motor with boost?
Yes, but the knock limit is still there, right? So the knock limit is one of those things, like extra fueling is part of our safety margin against knock.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter if it's port or direct or whatever. All things being equal, if it's knocking, a richer mixture is less likely to knock.
I guess what I'm getting at is port motors, and this is obviously not exact on every single motor, but typically a port motor likes 78, 80 when you kind of get a little crazy with boost. And then the direct motors, you put them at 78 or 80 with boost, they choke and they don't like it, they hate it. So we end up having to go 12.5.
Well, again, watch your high pressure rail number, because if the rail pressure is dropping,
that's 100% not dropping. Everything's working.
Okay.
Everything's in the limit. Everything's in the window. Is it because of the efficiency of the engine?
well, I mean, you can get away. Remember, the European turbo cars stay stoic under boost, and they're perfectly happy. So, arguing Lambda 1 versus Lambda 0.8, and if both 1 and 0.8 are happy, you don't have to go down to 75. Well, then 0.9 would be fine as well.
Right, but in that theory, then if you had a port injected motor, you'd run it at 0.85 because.
Well, I've seen it. I mean, absolutely. There are PFI supercharged or turbocharged engines that run stoic under boost, or they run 0.9 Lambda. And it is completely doable. And they might be fine.
Most power?
Well, I mean, again, LBT, lean best torque, is going to be usually somewhere 0.85 to 0.9, somewhere up in that range, depending on your fuel.
But so the boost you're just counteracting with.
So we add extra fuel for knock resistance and cooling.
I guess I don't understand why the DI can get away with the leaner mixture, but the port can't.
Because the in-cylinder preparation at the last moment includes an extra cooling shot.
Okay. So then, in that matter, when you go port injected, on a DI as well.
You still have, so there's diminishing returns on how much DI is enough to get the job done.
Mm.
So the more DI we add, it's not a straight line that more DI means more in-cylinder cooling. There's a practical limit to how much works.
Right.
Once you get near that practical limit, adding more fuel in the cylinder, you are less likely to mix it and evaporate it, and you don't get to fully harness any significant extra cooling effect. So you might as well just make sure you add it at the other point where it gets fully mixed.
Right.
Because unmixed fuel is not super good for combustion.
So would you run the same air fuel, the same target, Lambda, with a direct injector only boosted engine as a port injector direct injector boosted?
I mean, my first guess would probably be Lambda 78 to Lambda 80. Blake! We are recording, young man.
Yeah, I guess the reason I was asking is I do see that a lot of these guys will go to, they'll tune them at 85 and then they'll put port on them and they'll tune them at 85.
It
And
probably works.
Yeah.
I
In
mean,
my testing, it makes
what's
a lot,
your-
as you start richening it definitely makes a lot more power.
what's your risk tolerance is what it comes down to, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, none of these guys have in-cylinder pressure transducers, so they're not really seeing the knock. Right? If you're waiting for the knock sensor, and oh, by the way, they probably desensitized the knock sensor anyway because they got different valve train and different pistons and whatever, so they had to move the noise threshold for the knock sensor out of the way a little
I
bit.
was told by one guy that if you adjust the knock sensors from stock because you did a cam, you installed the cam wrong. I was like,
Well,
if you've ever heard of Spintron,
there you go.
that
Yeah, the knock sensor is
you're absolutely
fundamentally.
making more noise with cam and dual springs and things like that.
Yeah,
And if you don't move those knock sensors a little bit,
This is a fancy knock sensor right here, right? They're just microphones.
Yep.
So the knock sensor always hears some amount of noise. The engine is never silent.
right.
And
Oh,
there's
I've
an
got the flex
accept-
monitor, and I'm
there
like,
is
oh,
a
God.
background level of noise, like you say on the Spintron, right? With no
Yep.
combustion in it whatsoever.
They're loud.
That is a non-zero number,
I
right?
think everybody should watch a video of a Spintron
100%.
if you haven't watched that. And what that is basically it's the valve train components with, just one shaft in the middle that spins it up to whatever RPM you're going to go with a high-speed camera that measures the valve train events.
Yeah, now throw a crankshaft connecting rods and pistons in there.
Right. And then add an exhaust that wasn't designed on that vehicle and it's more hollow, so it's tinging.
And a
it's collector.
supercharger on the accessory drive.
Right.
With its own gear set inside of it.
Yeah.
That transmits through metal brackets right back to the head.
So there's definitely a limit to how much you want to bring those knock sensors up, but you absolutely, if you do a cam and you're not bringing them up a little bit, you're just kicking yourself in the
Well,
foot.
and add a supercharger, right? So,
Yeah.
and if you put a supercharger on the engine, it introduces noise. So the knock sensor is a microphone. And so somewhere in the calibration on all EFI systems, the way knock works is we define a noise floor. And we say everything below this noise level, whatever unit you use for it, is okay. That's normal. And then we have some exceeds this value, and if exceeds the value, then that must be bad and we need to do something to the spark.
Mhm.
That's in a nutshell how knock control works. But again, like you change the hardware, this floor probably needs to move a little bit to represent your new floor. And then how bad? But then what you're doing is you're masking some of the combustion noise. Now in the OEM side, they calibrate all of that not based on knock ears and
That's all we got. Calm down. That's all we got.
they again go back to that in-cylinder pressure transducer,
Right.
because if you measure the in-cylinder pressure, you can see the knock on the screen. It shows up as a very detectable spike.
Yeah.
Even when filtered, it's still obvious if
Yeah, I
you're
think
using
Shane did
intercom
videos
or
on that too.
pads. Right? So it's like cheating, right? It's the absolute cheat code for knowing what's going on inside your engine. And so the knock calibration expert spends a ton of time with AVL intercom software on a running engine, on a dyno, and then into the car. And he spends his life trying to decide where that line is between acceptable noise and bad noise.
Mhm.
And he spends years doing that before the car goes on sale. And we in the aftermarket are going to outsmart that in 20 minutes without cast data.
No, we're not. But we're gonna do what's reasonable based on with the tools that we have. So basically, every time I get a different combo, I'll throw the knock ears, the flex monitor on it, and I'll sit there and I'll just go up. It takes forever, but I'll go 1 degree. Okay, I'll pull that down. I'll add a little fuel. I'll pull that down. I'll pull a little fuel, and then I'm just kind of watching what.
So
it's
as
doing.
a business owner, how profitable is that part of the business?
It's not well.
It's tough, right? A lot of customers don't want to pay. You could spend hours doing that.
I've spent like each platform. I'd say I've got at least 2 weeks worth of
but
time
for
in
a
each
single
combo.
customer, is a single customer going to spend another $500 on top of
No.
$1,500 on top of whatever,
But it comes
just
with
for your knock
experience.
cap?
It comes with time.
Oh
and
yeah, you
experience.
get better at it. And
Yeah.
look, I'm kind of used to, the car is in this range. I kind of got a feel for, we can move it to about here. And it gets rid of the odd events, and big events I still catch. And I don't live or die by being right on that ragged edge of trusting the knock sensor all the time.
Yeah.
So again, my base spark number that I go with is always maybe a little bit soft from what it could be, but not too soft because I don't want to leave a ton of heat in the exhaust pipe.
Right.
So we're back full circle.
Okay. Yeah, I know, again, it's a unique opportunity to speak with you about it because you see both sides where most calibrators don't see both sides.
Yeah, I mean, there's a balance, right?
How much does knowing what the OEM has versus knowing what we have, say, for HP tuners, how much does that really, I'd just say, bother you? Like, do you feel, and
It's a
however you
different
feel,
game.
do you feel like we're ever effectively doing our job properly, or are we just getting close enough?
We get close enough. I mean, nobody's gonna pay for perfect.
No.
Unfortunately, like we only have a
you're
limited amount of
perfect,
time
you're
when we go
perfect.
to tune a car, right?
Mhm.
When I do an emissions count in a car, I might have the car for a month, and even then, it's pretty abbreviated compared to any OEM program I've ever been on.
Right.
But a customer's not gonna pay me for a month of calibration time for their one car. What's your hourly rate again?
Yeah.
Right? They look at us like we're robbing their children. If I was to charge my engineering rate times 1 month of work, they would lose their mind for an aftermarket tune.
Right.
However, I want it at that level. So
You gotta have trade-offs.
absolutely. And engineering is a world of trade-offs. And even on the aftermarket side, we have to identify what's our risk tolerance. We're not going to get it perfect.
Right. Well, that's kind of how I look at it. So I'll push a platform until I've gotten uncomfortable. Like on my own stuff, I'll get it to where I'm uncomfortable, and then I'll find out about where it was pretty safe, and I'll set a car up a little bit under that one. So it's going to make its peak power. It's going to make its efficiency. It's not going to be under time to where it's inefficient, but it's not going to be where I know it can go. Because if you put cars where they can go, people will find a way to fuck that up.
Yeah, well, yeah. And at the OEM, we have to do the same thing, right?
Right.
We don't know where somebody's going to take that thing. So we test in the worst possible conditions. High, low altitude, high, low temperature, on track, abusive, running around on good fuel, bad fuel, whatever, right? And that's why it takes years to do the development before it goes on sale. And some cowboy somewhere with a laptop goes, those OEM guys don't know anything. I made 50 extra horsepower with a tune.
In your specific environment,
We
sure.
could have, but on a sample size of 1, you got away with it.
Yeah.
We have to assume that the whole fleet running any fuel anywhere at any time, and this is why, again, that 1,000 horsepower ZR1 is amazing.
Oh yeah, it's a
Because
miracle.
somebody is going to fill that thing up with 87 octane and it better not break.
Right.
A lot of people are going to fill it up with 91 and go to a track day with it.
Yeah.
And they're going to hot lap it.
Well, one thing I notice I see a lot of tuners don't account for this, and something it caught me off guard a long time ago. Altitude. A lot of guys do the remote tuning, and I'm like, well, he's got the same timing at sea level on a car that is at altitude. How are you? If you build your table properly, it'll work. But when you go in there and you make everything one number.
Well, yeah, so one number is dangerous, right?
But
I love
But how
steel
common?
tables.
How common is that? The one number tunes. Be honest. I'd say 70%, 75%.
Again, I'm sorry, unpopular opinion. The gene pool tuners could use a little chlorine. And if you're just flattening the table, it tells me you don't understand what the table does, or you don't understand the relationship to one of the axes of the table.
Or the axis is another one. If you're stopping at 1.3 and then you're going 2.0, right?
Well, you just get the same from there on out. I mean, that's what you've given it,
right.
by definition.
Which obviously you're going from 1.3 to
So
2.0.
if you
better
get
be
the
pulling
older
time.
LS1s, right, they can only go to 512 on airflow,
We get lucky on this.
and they can only go to 8 grams per second on fuel flow, and they can only go to, 1.28 on gram per cylinder. And you generally hit all three of those at about
Right
the
away.
same kind of point, right?
That's why I tell people just put a Holly on them. I'm like, dude, if you're gonna boost it,
I mean, we can double it, right? So if
But
you do a
still.
50% scaling exercise, all of a sudden 700 horsepower now becomes 1400.
right.
And it's doable. You've cut the resolution
lost the
in half,
resolution,
but you've
right?
doubled the range. However, I submit to you, have you ever been in a case where even with a scaled cal, you couldn't make a 1% change to your MAF or a 1% change to your VE? If you can still make a 1% change, and look, combustion's only good to 2% consistency, and I can make a 1% change, I'm good. And another unpopular truth, folks, as an OEM calibrator, there's no such thing as 0 fuel trims.
Well, that's not a thing even in aftermarket.
Like, if somebody came to me as an OEM calibrator and said, hey, your program, look, I don't like it, you've got like 4 or 5% fuel trims, I laugh at them. I said, on what vehicle at what time, right? Because we have to count such a wide fleet.
Well, also the O2 sensors theoretically wouldn't work if there was no fuel trim.
Well, they have to bounce, right?
Right,
So,
they
but
have
I
to
mean,
move.
they're not going to be plus or minus 2%. Occasionally, they're 8%, 10%, odd 12%, whatever. If it's not double digits, I don't even want to have the conversation on an OEM program, because the variability is so big across the fleet that, I worked on a program once where I was the vehicle torque control guy, and I called my base dyno guy back at home because I was out in Colorado testing at altitude, driving nice and steady state, 30 mile an hour, but I was at 9,200 feet of altitude. And I said, hey, at this speed, this load, these cam angles, my fuel trim's 17%. He goes, yeah. It's working, isn't it?
Oh, Jesus.
Right? And I'm like, 17%? But, and that cal passed emissions, it passed durability, and it's out for sale, and people are driving thousands and thousands of those cars. Right? Now, it was a corner case. I was at altitude, cams were phased a lot,
Yeah.
Okay, at sea level, it doesn't do that. And here in Detroit, we're about 900 feet, it doesn't do that. But out there, it did. But the trims were able to pull it in line, and there was no other problem other than I saw the number. I didn't like that. In the aftermarket, we beat our chest a lot. Oh, I need to do less than 5% trims everywhere. Yeah, this car is generally about 5%. But with what tank of fuel? Because if I go from Shell to Mobil, and I did hot rod power tour of this thing, right? The last tank of gas was in Illinois, this tank is in Indiana, and tomorrow is going to be in Michigan. Are they all from the same refinery?
Well, that's something I've learned.
Have they all been in the tank in the ground for the same amount of time?
Well, that's where you've got to give respect to the OE guys, because I've tuned in several countries around the world, and I can tell you that I cannot run the same tune in Saudi that I can in Germany or that I can in Israel.
You ever work with cars in Nigeria?
No.
Oh, they have the worst fuel.
Oh,
So one of the programs I work on, they do emissions testing around the world. They were measuring emissions, and by the way, all the cars in the Nigerian market are cars that have aged out from North America. So if you ever wonder where a car goes when it still runs, but it's got like 300,000 miles on it, and it's we would never drive it here anymore, but somebody sees value in it, they ship it over there, and then they feed it the worst fuel with the highest sulfur content and the most crud and junk in it. And they will do anything to keep the thing running, but maintain it.
Yeah.
Right? And so, they were measuring oxides of nitrogen and MOG and stuff like that over there, and it's horrendous numbers. But it runs.
Yeah.
It still runs, and it's so far past the design life, it's not even funny. But it still works. Engines want to run.
Yeah. It's just crazy to think of things like that, and that the OE can handle that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my big beef really, is that flat number and why that's such a problem, and not scaling the table appropriately, because say you're at like 1.2, right, and you get a real cold night and your turbo and your boost comes up and you're at 1.6 because it picked up like 4 pounds.
Yeah, so
And
if
your time is the
you don't put it into the load base table, do you catch it with temperature? Do you catch it with pressure? Like, is there some other table that's also catching it?
You would
or
hope
not?
that they would, but if they were too lazy to move the axis,
Yeah.
they're
Well, I
probably
see a
too
lot of
lazy
guys
to do
that don't like that something's got a negative timing at it. Oh, the IAT adder is
But you
pulling
need-
6 degrees of timing out. Well, it's physics, right? If
Yeah.
things are warmed up, they're easier to burn. You don't need to lead them as much.
Right.
So you don't need, like, an ideal engine.
Well,
has-
just like coolant temp, when it's colder, it adds timing.
But like an ideal engine, if I could design a combustion process, ideally as an engineer, I'd want bulk ignition of the entire charge about 8 degrees after TDC. So it's all instantly having that change at a point where it can push on the piston through the power stroke. Extra lead is just pushing against the compression stroke on the way up. That's, any of that by definition is wasteful to me. But we have to accept it because that's how the engine works.
Yeah.
Right? But that number, to get that peak at the right point on the way down, at the useful point in the cycle, needs to scale several things. Speed, load, temperature.
Well, that's what I was gonna say.
Ratio.
So why is that whole table, let's say from like 0.6 and 2500, all one number? Why is that a problem? I know, I just gotta play devil's advocate here.
Oh, like on a base timing map.
Yep.
Well, we know that, okay, so across the RPM range, your engine is like a musical instrument, it comes in and out of tuning. And so therefore the combustion is faster, slower, whatever, across that range. So you need to keep up with that. And oh, by the way, as we mechanically spin it faster, the process takes less time, therefore we need to lead it in order to get the peak to happen at the same time relative to TDC on the way down. So right away, it's like changing stations at the skeet range. Then the load axis is kind of simple. More load means molecules are jammed in closer together and they hand off on the relay race. So they pass the flame from one to the next much quicker when they're close together versus when they have to reach way over here and make the camera go way over here and then way over here with the camera. So when the molecules are really spread apart, we need to lead it more because that handoff happens slower. So if we look through the load axis of the table, there should be a trend on any single column of RPM that generally shows more load equals less timing.
Right.
That trend doesn't stop at some magical point.
I just feel like at some point, either it's laziness or just lack of care, that's starting to become more of a common thing again. And I'm like, it went away and then it come back. But I always look at what the OE did, right? Because I'm like, oh, even if I don't know why, I know it was done for a reason.
Yeah. Now, you might see the OE table has a corner that's flat, but it's
Well, 'cause it's
above
never
a
gonna-
load that they can never
Yeah,
get
it's
to,
never
right?
gonna
So a naturally aspirated engine could never get past this load anyway, so everything beyond that load doesn't matter.
Well, you'll
Could
see
be
that
zeros.
on like an LT1 car that
Yes.
you put boost on. If you expand the VVE table, you'll see it's got like chunks of just big negatives.
Well, because they fit from 90 to 105
Yep.
with one
And
zone.
then everything else.
And if you take that zone, it fit really good from 90 to 105, but if you extend it to 200,
Yep.
all of a sudden you see it tails up this way on one, it tails down this way on another.
Yeah.
But from 90 to 105, it was pretty close.
Well, and I see a lot of people
So-
that'll boost an LT1 car and they won't scale that VVE out. Most won't even touch it.
Well,
But if they do,
shame on them for not doing the background VE model, because I don't want to hear you complain about how your car drives in traffic and what the drivability is when you can't be bothered to get the air charge model right.
right? Because
Sorry.
everything needs to know what's
Yeah,
going
that,
on.
and oh, by the way, that number on an LT1, that's the prime input to the torque model.
Yeah.
So if you can't be bothered to do virtual VE on a Gen 5 because it's too complex or it takes too much time, don't piss and moan that your torque control and your throttle control doesn't work right.
Or
And
that
oh, by the way,
or
your
that your transmission
transmission
took a
won't
shift.
shift because the
Yeah.
transmission is taking that engine torque estimate.
Well,
if
and
no
now
torque
it's
sensor-
going into that part of the table that was improperly calculated.
And it's going to assume the torque is matching the air charge estimate, and it's going to pick a transmission pressure that matches the estimated torque.
Well,
And when that's not enough pressure to hold the clutches,
the issue is you'll see times where people will go in there and they'll fake the torque for the air mass model, and they're like, man, the transmission still took a shit. I'm like, well, because there was two. There's two. Just because you're only reading this
Well-
torque doesn't mean that's what the trans is seeing.
yeah. And by the way, I mean, if you get the air mass right, Turns out that AirMax model is not too far off most of the time.
Right.
The number one thing we can do to get the torque model right is just get the air charge right.
Well, what's funny
in both air charge models.
Some Matt Sanford, he was commenting on something, and he's like, if your mass air fails and you know about it, other than the check engine light, if you know it because your car runs like shit, you probably didn't dial everything in right.
Yeah.
I was like, man, that's so funny. I thought, yeah, if your mass air fails and you know, that's a problem. But that's where his whole thing of like bringing in some chat GPT came in, because he helped me and showed me where I could have the air mass calculate the VVE.
I don't need chat GPT for it. I got an equation for
Well, that's because you're smarter than me.
I'll give you the equation. I used to put it in my classes all the time. It's in my videos.
Well, that's why we're going to get...
Go to cartrainingonline.com, go to the GM section, go to the advanced.
So I bought that, right? And I was looking at that one night, and that's when I brought it up to Matt, and I was like, hey, you know, I'm not the best at making the histograms and the maths and all, you know, but I was watching this video. Funny that I think about it, it was your video. But anyways, he's like, oh yeah, ChatGPT can whip that up, blah, blah, and I'm like, well, that was way easier.
It's just part of my normal scanner now.
Yeah, well,
I always have it. So on my default, like even on an E38, I have it calculating virtual VE from the math, and I have it calculating airflow from the VE.
Yeah.
In real time, all the time. So if I'm doing the VE model, I can compare that to what the mass airflow sensor says.
That's what I do. I watch both, and I'm like, oh, that one's way off. We gotta fix that.
I usually don't do the wide open throttle in VE only, because I've told the ECU I've failed the math at that point. I'm on the low octane table anyway.
That's something you might
way up high. The mass airflow sensor is pretty darn accurate. That's where they're really.
It does good. Yeah, it does good at high speed, but not transition.
So at high, for the watt line, I will take the measured math and back calculate what GMVE should have been based on the mass airflow. And I plot that against my virtual VE breakpoints, and then I use that to correct my virtual VE table to make sure things jive.
Yep.
And hot dog if it doesn't line up pretty darn close.
And
it doesn't have to be perfect.
It makes a measurable difference.
Oh yeah.
In drivability overall.
Watt shifting on autos.
Yep. Yep.
Right, and you know, if traction control happens to jump in, it's based on a real number.
Yeah.
So even this has an older traction control system, but it works.
On the C7s.
Oh, it's great.
If you see like a Z06 and it's like when they go, it's like, but it just goes right through.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't do the VVE,
yeah, it can't.
Oh no, it just and 100%. It's crazy because these are all things that I've only learned this in the last probably 2 years. So I've been like back doing things, and but it's just,
it's like that's like
it's fundamentals that
day
somebody
one
could have
stuff that
taught us.
Right?
If only somebody did a live class on fundamentals that us tuners that have been doing this for a while could see this. And you know, everybody's gonna be like, oh bro, I knew that. Half of them don't even log the VVE stuff.
So again, as a senior calibration engineer with over a decade of experience, when I worked at Ford, I went to Dr. Haywood's class. And he taught it as if it was a 300 or 400 level class at university, where we started with suck, squish, bang, blow.
And that's the problem is I think a lot of people are like, oh man, I literally have people that are like, why do you go to the tuning class at PRI? I'm like, because that one nugget is worth thousands of dollars to me.
Yeah, or what's this dude's take on it?
100%. That's why I said I'll listen to anybody. Even if I think that they're not very intelligent, I'm still going to shut up and listen. And I'm going to say yes, yes sir, no sir, ma'am, whatever.
Even if you know they're dead wrong, you can go, well, they're wrong because they didn't account for this.
Right.
And now you're exercising your brain on it, going, okay, well, I'm not going to make that mistake. But again, he might have one other nugget somewhere else, or he stumbled onto something for all the wrong reasons, but then you put it together and said, oh, I bet if I don't do that, it will do this.
Yep, that's happened several times. And I've learned.
That's totally worth it too.
I've learned useful things from useless people.
Sometimes my only role in life is to show you what not to do.
But, so I guess touching on all that, what would be your advice to somebody that does want to get into this industry? That does want to start calibrating cars, even if
oh my God, go do something else.
That's what I say.
Go make your money somewhere else.
Some people want the punishment that we endure.
If I was smart, I wouldn't do this for a living. I'm not smart.
So what would you suggest for somebody to start out?
Again, the fundamentals never fail you, right? So understand, like, go back and see how a fuel injector works. Some of the SAE documents are glorious about that. They're old papers. Nothing that we do with combustion is new. It's been out there for over 100 years. I was watching some other thing. Ben Schrader he was referencing.
I love this stuff.
He was referencing a NACA document from the 1920s, so a 100-year-old document, and it was talking about various grades of fuel, and it was all, you know, in the lens of using it for airplane engines, right? So incredibly large displacement, kind of low horsepower, but they're looking at effects of fuel-air ratio on torques at various speeds and loads. This stuff, the science has not changed. Now, the numbers and the units they used were pretty archaic, but the lesson was golden, right? And it was right on the money, right? And that stuff doesn't change. That's physics. So, you know, a book that was written 5 years ago or 50 years ago or 100 years ago could be right on the money if it's truly following the basics, right? Do you understand what volumetric efficiency means? Do you understand what load means? What's the difference between percent load and percent VE? Why are they different numbers? Right? Once you truly understand this kind of stuff, then as we go forward, now we can start to say, okay, does that make sense? Does it pass the smell test? Right? And so as we gather more experience, things start to kind of gel. But even I'm still learning this, right? I'll sit in.
You'll always be learning, that's the thing.
I hope.
Yeah. If you ever get to the point where you feel like you know everything, just choose a different path, because that's not a thing that happens. I tell people, go to as much, I don't care whose class it is, I don't care what it is, if you can go to it, do it, because it's any chance that you can make yourself better, you should be doing that.
I would agree.
Because it only nets everybody else's benefit as well as your own. And you're going to start doing live classes, right?
Probably not a ton of them, but I am available. You know, so a lot of the stuff that was in my live classes is on the video training site. So a lot of those lessons are there. The boot camp series is a lot of that same lessons. I took things that I was putting in that class and we just recorded it. And we did it with a visual demonstration on top that I can't really do in a live class because I can't bring all the gear to a live class wherever that is. But we were able to do it in front of the camera for the video, so that's cool. And you know, I get people who say, okay, well, I want to learn more. I watched all that and I still have a couple questions. Cool, great. I will do a Zoom. You can email me, call me, whatever, and we'll set something up. And we can just set aside a 2-hour block on a Thursday afternoon. And I'll say, okay, here, log into this Zoom link and I'll be there and we'll share screens and let's talk about your project. And we can talk about how those lessons translate to the thing that you're working on such that you understand it.
What about the people that don't want to use ChatGPT to build scanner configs and things like that? Do you sell that with your lessons? Does that come with your lessons?
I've never sold configs. I mean, so if we were in a live Zoom, whatever, I'm happy to just show you what I got and say, here, add these channels.
Maths and configs would be, I think if you could put that together, Matt Sanford does it as well. I think if you could put that together, that would help. That would be a net positive for the
Yeah, I
industry.
haven't looked at them as a product, I guess.
They're a product, 100%, because just think the one table that I added, and like I said, it's been a few years since I've had it, but in those few years, I've been able to make strides over what, you know, I thought was very good, and customers were very good, but then I compare it to what I'm able to do with now these extra parameters, and I'm like, there was so much more that we could have done. Yeah, we were hitting our goals, we're running numbers, we're doing what we needed to do, but I felt like it was a good leg up, and honestly, it may help people be better.
Yeah, you know, and this is stuff that we used to, I would give the equations away. I mean, the equations are in the videos. When I would do a live class, I would say, okay, you know, everybody look at this slide right here, and it's in your notes that you have from the class. Like, save this, circle this, whatever, come back to this on Monday morning when you get back to your dyno, because you're going to want to add this. This is a time saver.
Yeah.
So that's real. So I mean, yeah, I mean, if you contact me, I can certainly get you guys in touch. I mean, there's really only a handful of them that we need. There's not that many of them, And they're all just kind of working that same math, like I was saying, like what's the difference between VE and percent load? You know, what does gram per cylinder really represent? How do you calculate from the math? How do you get there from speed density? And once you know how they both get to this point, well, I can go from math to gram per cylinder and gram per cylinder to speed density, or backwards.
Or how to tell which way to make the computer bias it and which one that it's using at what time. That's something I think a lot of people don't realize is when, you know, I've had guys that are like, oh, well, if you set, and you may have a different opinion, people set that dynamic air table, they'll do like 400, 300, right? And they're like, oh, well, if you did that, then the VE is useless. No, it's not. I said, okay, that's fair. And they had a big discussion, and I didn't give my opinion. I just said, I was like, you guys are making fun of the people that put 400 and 300, and you know which one I'm talking about. I said, you guys make fun of those guys, right? You do that on yours, and go take your VE and put it at 0, and let me know how that works out. Let me know how your car starts. Let me know when you tap the gas pedal what it does.
So for me, I'm giving way too much here, but like I'll go do the VE first. So that background model is done, and then I go do my math.
Right.
And now the math is wrong, and I will do the 400, 300, but it's blended with the correct number there, but I know the error is in the math transfer function.
But because people are lacking the fundamentals, they get on these HP tuner pages and they talk shit on people, and they're like, oh, well, you're just running math only, and
Someday I'll be as smart as the guys on the
I was one of the, look, I even told Wendy this. I said, I was one of those guys that thought, oh, they're just doing math only. They're stupid. And that was probably within my first 5 years because I didn't know. I was like, oh, that's what that does. But as I got older and more into it, I tested things and I would move the number, and I'd literally spend, you know, I'll take, okay, I'm gonna spend 3 days on this one car. Phone's off and I focus and I change little things and I see what it's doing. And once I learned that, now I'm, you know, almost 15 years.
A math is a wonderful steady state device.
Yeah.
But like even on the old Gen 2 LT1s, same strategy by the way, math and speed density combined when they had a math sensor on them. GM realized even with the math sensor right in front of the throttle body, during a sharp tip in, we can't anticipate correctly.
Well, let's go one step further. So LSA, and I'm sure you see people, they're like, oh, well, you know, I put a pulley, I put this, I put that, and when I tap it, it goes boop, boop. And I'm like, oh, cool. But if you watch what your air mass does, right? Because, and again, if I'm wrong, it's a positive displacement blower. So by the time you tipped in, it has made boost before that air mass even sees the air move. I've seen boost pressure with the air mass at almost the exact same hertz. And this went from vacuum to boost.
Well, because you closed the bypass, and that immediately
pressurized it.
Gets rid of the leak path.
Yep.
So that's one thing that's happening. Now, the other is like if you had without a supercharger, or with a really large supercharger, there's a lot of volume in between the mass airflow sensor and the intake valve.
Well, the 2650s make this a lot worse.
And so when you crack it open, you have to fill that volume. And so you get a 2650 or a 3 liter or 3.8 liter blower, you've got to fill those caverns. And it does not happen instantaneously, right?
Right.
So there has to be some anticipation logic, and in some cases, the math might actually go up when the actual air per cylinder has not yet gone up. Because you're just filling the manifold, but you're not yet filling the cylinders. That's why there is a
vacuum in your lobes.
Yeah, so there is a intake manifold volume scaler in there.
Yep. Oh, you just leave that alone. You don't need
why,
that. What do you need that for?
Why would they ever put that in there, right?
Stupid GM.
Yeah, idiots. So there's a way to account for that, because yes, if you look at the math during a step throttle event, the math, if you have a small volume, you haven't anticipated enough. If you have too big a volume, you've anticipated too much, and it's Goldilocks, right?
Yep.
But you don't know which side of it you're on until after you've already had a combustion event or two, and then start seeing O2 errors. And by then, you've already missed the train.
Right. And then there's you know, some of that is transient in the
LT. By the way, the fuel
stuff
comes partly from the injector and partly from the port wall from 3 cycles ago.
On LT.
Well,
I mean, LS,
on
LS,
LS, yes.
right.
And Gen 2 LT.
Oh,
yeah, remember,
yeah.
push
Sorry, I
button.
forget those existed.
Yeah, the OptiSpark. Sorry, dating myself again.
But yeah, so that's something else that I think people need. These are all fundamentals. This is what I'm trying to say. Like, we need a real fundamentals class that's going to teach it arguably the way that I was taught, because I feel like it's helped me tremendously. Is this button does this? This is why it does it. And
Yeah, the
I don't
fundamentals
care
never
if
go
it's-
out of style.
If it's a $2,000 class, if you're going to teach button by button, that's worth tens of thousands realistically.
Yeah, I mean, and quite honestly, we probably have to make it like a week-long class. So,
But if it's worth it, I think people don't value how much the fundamentals really are. It was a pooch. We played a pooch.
Good.
But anyways, I think that pretty much covers even more than I anticipated. But like I said, I'm super grateful to have you.
no,
I
I'm
followed your
glad you
stuff
came
for so
out
long.
here to see us. Right?
Yeah.
You're here in the tech center. Don't destroy the illusion of how big we are, right?
Yeah. It's still kind of crazy to think of, like, growing up here had to be so awesome to be a gearhead.
Yeah, I mean, like,
Maybe
keep in
here.
mind, like, the first Woodward Dream Cruise was like 96, 97 time frame. I was in college, and the guys I went to college with were like, "Do you know where Woodward Avenue is?" Like, dude, I grew up like 3 miles from there. I know exactly. It's just Woodward. And I had to remember that, oh yeah, this is like the place where John DeLorean used to race GTOs.
Yeah. See?
Like, oh yeah, it's a thing.
It's just so crazy. But if people want to get your stuff, because you do have a lot of training, a lot of courses, the fuel pump load thing is still something really cool that people still don't follow. But
I can only put it out there, man. I can't make
that
music.
nugget was, detriment. How do people find you directly? What is the best way to contact you?
So the website's calibratedsuccess.com. So on there you'll find pretty much everything else there. If you go down the front page just a little bit, you'll see a link to our live training site. That'll send you over to cartrainingonline.com. It's run by my buddy Dave, not me, but I'm the idiot on camera. So you see a lot of me talking on that site. But that's all the training videos that used to be DVDs that we used to have to mail you a physical copy or order through Summit or whatever. Now it's a streaming world, so all of those are out there. They're cheaper on streaming. Dave has added an option now where you can pay one time and get the whole site for a discount, like half price. You get the whole dang thing in one shot.
When did that start?
Well, we just had to rebuild the site about a month ago because the old site crashed and we had to redo it all. So what we did is we took everybody who had bought even one video of all our previous existing customers. We said, we're very sorry for the outage. Here's access to everything.
I need to check my email then.
Yeah, you should go check your email.
Because I bought the course twice on accident.
Go do your login. Well, you may now have access to everything because we turned everybody on as long as they registered again with the same user on the new site, and we just gave it all to them for free. When we add new stuff, that will be a la carte again beyond that, and we'll have an option to buy everything, but we make it a significant discount. So even buying piecemeal at the list price on the site is still cheaper than getting the physical disc. We used to tell people, hey, 1 year, we basically don't turn anybody off unless we catch you cheating. So if you're sharing your login with a dude halfway across the country, it's going to be obvious.
We shouldn't do that anyways.
Yeah,
that's just.
Like, dude, I got.
Don't
bills
be a
to-
dirtbag.
Yeah, I got bills to pay, right? I still got a mortgage, so.
And the course material is invaluable. It really is. If this is something that you seriously want to do, the course material is invaluable. 100%. As a consumer myself, it's invaluable.
Yeah, my standard is like, what's the stuff I wish somebody would have told me, and when I put it out there, it better be technically correct.
Yeah.
Right. So if I get something technically wrong, please point it out to me.
Right.
But I feel like we've been doing a pretty good job on that front.
Yeah. And like I said, I think that's my whole mission here is I want to connect people and give this information out, because for a long time I was that shitbag tuner that was like, oh, I've got these secrets, and I've got to the point where all I'm doing is hurting the industry.
Well, I told people when I would teach live classes, even 20 years ago, never ceases to amaze me how dumb I used to be. Right? We didn't know what we didn't know for the longest time, and until I had that epiphany, until I met with a couple of OEM guys, and then I kind of pieced it together and connected the dots, and like, that's where that first book came from.
Yeah.
Right? And then the second book, and then the third book, and now there's another one coming, whatever. But yeah, it's, don't be afraid to kind of drop back and punt a little bit and say, hey, you know, let's figure out what's really going on here, right?
Right.
In the OEM, we call it root cause analysis, right? We want to get down to the fundamental of what's really happening here. So,
well, the more you help other people, and like I said, I only started this 6 months ago, and the change that I've noticed between other tuners is unbelievable. The amount of people that will actually reach out now, and I wish I had that as I came up. Yeah, they'll reach out and then they'll be like, hey, you know, I found this, and I'm like, I'm picking these nuggets up too. I'm like, wow. The more you help, the more you're gonna learn as well. I'm like, this is crazy. Why didn't we do this before?
I mean, shamefully, yeah, I learned from my clients, right? I didn't think anybody would ever do that, but what happens if you do?
Oh, I pick up stuff from customers all the time that don't even tune. They're like, oh, well, I've changed this and it does this. I'm like, oh shit, he's right.
Yeah.
And
it might be for all the wrong reasons,
I'm like,
but it works.
Right. Well, then my brain goes, and I'm like, oh my god, how did he? You know, why does that work? I get what you're saying, but why?
But I mean, I'm on the website. The website's got phone, email, whatever. I'm just Greg at Calibrated Success.
And he does answer the phone.
Yeah, occasionally. As best I can. So I got a lot. I juggle a lot. So just be patient with me.
Harris is like, just reach out to him. I'm like, I don't know if he'll answer. He doesn't know.
I try. It's just, you know, sometimes I'm overwhelmed. Yeah. But I'm available. I mean, I do set up one-on-ones with people, end users, shop owners, whatever. I've had shop owners fly me out, and I go spend a couple days with them at their facility, no problem.
And I've talked to shop owners that you've done that with, and again, invaluable.
Well, because we do more than just tuning when we're there, right? Yeah. I'll walk around the shop. Look, I've been in a few shops. I've owned one before. Mm-hmm. I see opportunities for improving your efficiency.
I was gonna say that's it. He said he's like this guy done help me make my shop run even better as well as the tuning. I'm like,
and run the business of a tuning shop, because I wish somebody would have told me that. I was dumb. I was young and dumb when I started my shop, and I didn't have good practices. I put myself in a bad spot a lot because I didn't understand the right way to handle this. I mean, simple things like customer comes in, hey, I want to do a supercharger on my car. I'd say, okay, and I put them on the books, and I would order the supercharger, and I wouldn't bill them until the car was done. No more now, right? Because if you just gave them a free loan and you just took all your working capital and invested it in this dude's supercharger, that you're not going to pay for. Now it's okay, great.
And then he rushes you to get the car done, and then he can't pay for it yet. That happens a lot.
So now it is great. Let's get a deposit on those parts. Let's get the parts paid for when they come in. Your name's on the box. They'll sit here until that. I don't want to see your car until the parts are here. And there's an opening on the schedule to do everything with it. Right?
Well, and then the other thing when people do get into this tuning, I'm not trying to make this go any longer, but this is important. When people go to tune a car, how many times is the car ready for a tune?
All it needs is a tune, Justin.
But then when it breaks, they're like, oh, well, you need to slip me in. And you know, we're human. We're like, oh man, this sucks. It's only going to take, an hour, which she always says an hour just in time is 3.
Yeah. Oh, nice. You know the conversion factor. That's great.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, let me try to fix it. And then the customers have to wait. And then over time, I've learned, I'm like, man, it's hurting the rest of this business. And so people need to learn that, when a car comes for a tune and it breaks, because that's what happens.
Learning how to schedule your time as a tuner or as a dyno shop was a huge one for me.
Which sometimes is pretty impossible. Like, we do travel, we stop in a city, we'll tune 5 or 6 cars, and I always get people, they're like, oh man, I'm sorry, I didn't know my car was gonna do this. I'm like, we already knew. That's why I won't give you a timeline to the next city I'm going to, because I don't know. I may want to get there by Monday, but I may be Wednesday.
Yeah.
Because of what happened.
I would leave a lot of time, like when I scheduled, my shop.
Buffers.
Fridays, nobody got appointments on Fridays. I was working Fridays, but there were no new appointments on Fridays. Right. I needed 1 day a week just to catch up with either things that ran long during the week or things that were coming internally from the shop that needed to get on the dyno and get dialed in then.
Yeah.
In addition to customers coming in. So a customer walked into the showroom and said, hey, I want to tune my car. We would point to the calendar on the wall and say, the first open square is 6 weeks from tomorrow. Oh man, really? Yeah, really. And I'm not putting you in front of all of those people because they have all been patiently waiting.
Right.
So today is Bob's day, and I'm working with Bob at 1 p.m.
Well, and
it is Bob's dyno at 1 o'clock.
It goes for the remote people too, and this is something, I've had over time, I've had issues with time management and getting to people on their appointments, and I've 100% had issues. But if I'm tired or something like that, I won't tune. because it's not worth the risk of the mistake.
Well,
But
yeah, you don't make mistakes because you're dumb. You make mistakes because you're in a hurry.
right, and I tell people, I'm like, look, you may get mad at me because it's taking a little longer, or I missed an appointment, but you're not going to get mad at me because your car scattered.
Yeah.
But so over the last few years, I've been adjusting it. I had like a 30-minute buffer between appointments, right? I do like a 2-hour tune
Oh,
session.
no,
30-minute buffer.
I don't even book that tight anymore. I can't.
Well, now mine's 2 hours, 1 hour.
Yeah.
For every, it's double. So whatever the
Yeah.
appointment is, if it's a 30-minute appointment, I have a 1 hour buffer.
And when I remote for somebody, I just set the level expectation rate. You might get 1 response a day. You might get 4 in a day.
Yeah.
It depends on what I've got going on here. I'm going to do the best I can. But
Because we still have families, we still have lives.
yeah, well, and oh, by the way, this is not my only thing I'm working on right now.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So I've got
we do
another
YouTube,
contract.
traveling.
Yeah, I got another big contract that I do for a major OEM that takes a lot of hours every week. And I'm sorry, guys, that's the priority because they write a big check that helps me keep the lights on here.
But that's also why I strive for all this extra knowledge, right? So
Yeah.
the guys that are patient and that do work with us, we're just know that behind the scenes we're doing
Oh,
all
I
these
do not
classes.
bill anywhere near as much time as I
Right.
put into these things.
Well,
Right?
because we put all this in there to make sure that when we are doing the tuning, whether we miss an appointment, we're sorry, but at the end of the day, you're going to get something that 90% of the people are not going to give you.
100%.
So, anyways, make sure that you go to the website, get the tuning stuff. Everybody always asks me, how do you, where do you learn this stuff? Well, here you go. You've got a guy that has seen the forbidden fruit, and knows what we have and makes it work. So again, I'm super grateful to be able to actually meet you and to sit down with you. Tune in on our next episode.